Welcome back, Legends. You're at Omni Wizard. Another incredible story awaits. What if Harry Potter inherited the Sorcerer Supreme's powers and surpassed Dumbledore? Subscribe and hit the bell. Let's dive right in. Chapter 1. The second letter. The cupboard under the stairs had a smell that Harry had never been able to name. It wasn't quite damp, wasn't quite dust. It was something older than both. Something that belonged specifically to small dark places where a person had spent too many years trying to make themselves smaller than they already were. He'd slept in it for 10 years. He knew every crack in the low wooden ceiling, every spider that came and went through the gap near the hot water pipe, every hour of light and dark that leaked under the door. He was 11 years old today, and he was lying on his cot staring at the ceiling when the world changed. It didn't announce itself. There was no crack of thunder, no flash of green light, no owl tapping at the tiny vent window. What happened was quieter and stranger than any of that. Harry was staring at a crack in the wood, a hairline fracture that ran from the nail above his pillow to the corner joint when the crack moved. Not physically, it didn't widen or shift, but Harry's perception of it shifted so radically and so suddenly that he actually rolled off the cot and hit the floor with both hands braced, gasping. He could see through it, not through the wood, not into the hallway where Uncle Vernon's heavy footsteps would soon come crashing down toward the kitchen. He could see through the crack the way you might see through a tear in a painted backdrop. Behind the scenery, behind the performance of the physical world, there was something else. Something vast and humming and deeply, fundamentally alive. Layers upon layers of existence folded over each other like pages of a book too large to hold. Colors that didn't have names. Geometries that made his eyes water and his breath catch and his heart slam against his ribs like it wanted out. Then it closed. The crack was just a crack again. Harry sat on the floor of the cupboard for a long moment, breathing hard, his palms flat against the gritty wood. His forehead was burning. Not his scar, though that came a second later, a dull throb that he'd learned to ignore the way you learn to ignore a loose tooth. This was his whole forehead, his whole skull, warm from the inside the way a coal is warm, like something had just been lit. He pressed his fingers to his temple. His fingers were shaking. "Happy birthday," he said to himself very quietly. It seemed like the appropriate response. Breakfast at the Dursleys was its usual performance. Dudley received a racing bike, a remote-control airplane, a new computer game system, and a wristwatch with a speedometer on it, which Harry privately thought was the most Dudley object he had ever seen. Aunt Petunia cried a little because her darling was growing up. Uncle Vernon looked at Harry once, the way you look at a piece of furniture you're considering throwing out, and then returned his attention to his second helping of eggs. Harry ate his toast and watched the crack in the kitchen ceiling. He couldn't stop doing it, looking at cracks, at edges, at the places where two surfaces met. Each time, for just a fraction of a second, he thought he could almost see it again. That layered, humming depth. Like learning a new word and suddenly hearing it everywhere. The post arrived. Dudley's friend Piers Polkiss came over and the two of them vanished upstairs with the new computer games. Uncle Vernon settled into the sitting room with the newspaper. Aunt Petunia began washing up and Harry was about to start on the dishes when the letterbox clattered. He almost didn't go. It wasn't his job, and Vernon would shout if he thought Harry was slacking on the kitchen. But something, the warm feeling behind his forehead maybe, or just the particular quality of the silence in the hallway, pulled him toward the front door. There were two letters on the mat. One was addressed in green ink on yellowish parchment. The address was written in a way that made Harry's chest do something complicated. Mr. H. Potter, the cupboard under the stairs, 4 Privet Drive, Little Winging, Surrey. He'd never gotten a letter before in his life. He picked it up with hands that were steadier than he expected. The second letter was smaller. The envelope was made of something that wasn't quite paper. It was thin, but it had weight to it, like it was denser than its size suggested. It was dark silver, the color of the sky right before lightning. There was no stamp, no postmark. The address was written in ink that kept shifting between silver and black depending on the angle, and it read, "To the bearer of the mantle when you are ready." Harry stood in the hallway of 4 Privet Drive, holding a letter addressed to him by name and a second letter addressed to what he apparently was, and thought, right then. He put both letters in his pocket before Uncle Vernon could come looking. The next 3 days were a masterpiece of chaos that Harry observed with a strange new detachment. Uncle Vernon destroyed the first Hogwarts letter before Harry could read it, but the replacement arrived before the ink was dry on Vernon's temper. Then more came. Then they came through the fireplace. Then Vernon packed everyone into the car and drove north and then east and then nowhere in particular, getting progressively more red-faced as the owls found them regardless. And Harry sat in the back seat with both letters tucked inside his sock and watched his uncle unravel with something approaching scientific interest. He hadn't opened the silver letter yet. He knew with a certainty that he couldn't explain and didn't try to that it would keep. That it was meant for a specific moment, and that moment wasn't while he was crammed into a car with Dudley sitting on him. The hut on the rock in the middle of the sea was miserable and cold and smelled like old fish. Harry drew a birthday cake in the dust on the floor and sat with his back against the wall, listening to the storm, counting down to midnight. When the boom hit the door, 3 thunderous blows that Harry felt in his sternum, he was already sitting up. Dudley shrieked. Vernon lunged for his rifle. And Hagrid came through the door like a force of nature, wearing a moleskin overcoat, dripping wet and furious, and somehow carrying a slightly squashed birthday cake. Harry stood up, and the warm feeling behind his forehead flared once, sharp and identifying, the way a compass needle snaps to north. He looked at Hagrid, really looked, the way he'd been looking at cracks and edges, and saw nothing alarming. What he saw was simpler and more startling than that. He saw someone who genuinely loved him in a steady, uncomplicated way and had for years from a distance. It was so different from everything else in his life that Harry had to look away for a moment to collect himself. "Harry," Hagrid said, beaming down at him with wet eyes, "you're a wizard." Harry thought about the crack in the cupboard ceiling, about the letter addressed to the bearer of the mantle, about the layered, humming vastness that had opened briefly behind the fabric of the world and then shut itself away again like a secret. "Yeah," Harry said, "I think I might be more than that, actually." Hagrid blinked at him, then he laughed, a booming, bewildered laugh. "Blimey, you haven't even read your letter yet." "I've got mine right here." Harry pulled the Hogwarts letter from his sock. "I've had it the whole time." Vernon kept catching the replacements. The look on Uncle Vernon's face when he realized that was, Harry decided, one of the better birthday presents he'd ever received. He opened the silver letter that night, while Hagrid was snoring across the hut floor and Dudley was whimpering in his sleep and the storm had quieted to a whisper. He sat on the edge of his cot and unfolded the heavy, silver-dark paper by the light of Hagrid's lantern. The handwriting inside was small and precise and absolutely certain of itself. "You will not remember me. This is intentional. What I have placed inside you is not a gift. Gifts can be refused, and you needed no choice in this. What I have given you is a responsibility so large that I could not, in good conscience, give it to anyone who had the option to say no. Children rarely say no to destiny. Adults almost always do. The mantle of the Sorcerer Supreme does not belong to any world, any tradition, or any bloodline. It belongs to the person most capable of bearing it. I believe that person was me for a very long time. The night your parents died, I discovered I was wrong. You are 11 years old. You have felt it waking. Good, don't be afraid of it. Fear is the correct response to many things. This is not one of them. Inside your copy of the Standard Book of Spells, Grade 1, which you should purchase at Flourish and Blots, you will find a page that does not exist in anyone else's copy. It will find you before you find it. From there you will know what to do next. Her name was the Ancient One. She was for a very long time the most powerful practitioner on this planet. Now you will be worthy of it, be kind. These two things are not in conflict." Harry read the letter twice, folded it, put it back in his sock. He sat for a moment, listening to the storm's last gasps against the window. Then he lay down and went to sleep. Because tomorrow was Diagon Alley, and whatever he was becoming, he was still going to need school supplies. Diagon Alley was an assault on every sense Harry possessed, and he now possessed considerably more than the average 11-year-old. The heat and noise and color of it hit him like a wall when he stepped through the leaky cauldron's back entrance, Hagrid tapping the bricks with his battered pink umbrella, the wall folding aside like a curtain, and Harry stood absolutely still for 3 full seconds just absorbing it. Magic moved differently here than it did in Surrey. At the Dursleys, magic was a thing that hid. It lurked under surfaces, behind cracks like something ashamed. Here it was completely open, moving through the air the way sunlight moves through water, and Harry's newly awakened senses drank it in with a hunger that surprised him. He could feel individual practitioners as he walked. Not intrusively, it wasn't like hearing thoughts. It was more like hearing tone. A witch haggling at the apothecary had a brisk, efficient magical signature. An old wizard sleeping on a bench outside Aelip's Owl Emporium had one that was warm and settled, like a banked fire. A man in deep purple robes arguing with a goblin at the entrance to Gringotts had one that was coiled and quick and very, very sharp. That last one glanced at Harry as they passed, and Harry glanced back, and for half a second the man went completely still. "Who's thaw?" Harry asked Hagrid. Oh, Don stare, Harry, that's Professor Quirrell. Teaches defense against the dark arts at Hogwarts. Bit of a nervous sort." Hagrid dropped his voice. "Rotten luck, runnin', inter Death Eaters on his gap year. Never been quite right since." Harry looked at Quirrell again. The professor was pretending to study a display of potion ingredients in a nearby window. His magical signature was wrong. That was the only word for it. The way a note played slightly sharp is wrong, technically present but jarring to anyone with a good ear. There was something under Quirrell's signature, something cold and layered and very old, like permafrost under a thin lawn. Harry filed it away. He didn't mention it to Hagrid. Gringotts was magnificent. Harry appreciated architecture that meant business, and Gringotts meant business, and the vaults were fascinating in ways he suspected they weren't supposed to be. The deep vaults where the truly old magic sat felt like pressure against his eardrums, a depth warning. He watched a fire-breathing dragon chained below them as their cart shrieked around a corner, and made a mental note that whatever was wrong about this place, the problem wasn't the dragon. The dragon was simply angry and had every reason to be. His vault made Hagrid go misty. Harry looked at the money and thought, that's practical, and filled his coin pouch without counting. Madame Malkin's robes came first, and that was where the first interesting thing happened. A boy with a pointed face and silver blonde hair was already being fitted when Harry arrived. He had the particular posture of someone who had always been the most important person in any room he'd entered, not arrogance exactly, more like a deeply ingrained assumption that had never been tested. "Hogwarts too," the boy said immediately and without introduction. "My name's Malfoy, Draco Malfoy." "Harry Potter," Harry said, because there wasn't much point dancing around it. The effect was immediate and fascinating. Draco's carefully maintained posture cracked into something genuinely surprised, then recalibrated almost instantly into something that was trying to look like it had never cracked. His magical signature spiked, interest, calculation, and underneath both of those, something Harry identified after a moment as envy, raw and uncomfortable and completely unacknowledged. "I've heard about you, of course," Draco said, recovering. "The whole wizarding world has, my father says." He paused, and Harry got the impression that "my father says" was a phrase Draco used as load-bearing architecture. It held up a lot of his thinking. "My father says you'll be famous for the rest of your life." "Probably," Harry agreed pleasantly. Draco blinked. He'd clearly expected either false modesty or preening. "Do you know what house you'll be in? My family's always been in Slytherin." "I haven't thought about it," Harry said, which was mostly true. "Well," Draco drew himself up slightly, "some families are better than others. Blood matters." Harry looked at him, really looked, the way he was learning to look at things. Under the certainty, under the name and the posture and the silver cufflinks on his Hogwarts robes, there was a boy who had been handed a set of beliefs the way you hand someone a piece of furniture. "Here, carry this, don't ask why, it's part of the family." Draco had never once been given the option to put it down. "That's an interesting thing to believe," Harry said, in a tone that was genuinely curious rather than challenging. "I wonder where you'd be if it turned out to be wrong." Draco had no answer to that. He spent the rest of the fitting looking at Harry sideways with an expression that was half suspicion and half something more uncomfortable, the earliest stirring of doubt. Flourish and blots was the highlight. Harry pulled his copy of the Standard Book of Spells, Grade 1, from the pile the shopkeeper assembled, and before he'd even tucked it under his arm, something slid under his fingers. A page. He felt it the way you feel a splinter, specific, insistent, impossible to ignore. He opened the book right there, standing between the shelves, while Hagrid attempted to navigate the wand care section behind him. The page was between pages 44 and 45. It had no page number. The text on it was dense and small and written in the same handwriting as the silver letter. The first forms, observe before you act. The eye sees what the hand does not yet know. Energy is borrowed, not generated. Return what you take. The mantle has 3 aspects in your case. The first is sight, you already have it. The second is transit, the ability to move between places and between moments. The third is binding, the ability to hold things in their proper place or remove them from it. Do not attempt transit yet. You are 11. Your body is still deciding what it is. Practice sight, let it grow, and find someone who thinks clearly. You will need an anchor. Harry closed the book, tucked it under his arm, went to find Hagrid. Ollivander's was the last stop and the strangest. The shop was dim and narrow, and the wandmaker himself appeared out of the shadows with the particular silence of someone who moved through small spaces constantly. His silver eyes were, Harry braced himself, extraordinary. Of every person he'd encountered today, Ollivander's magical signature was the one that made him feel most strongly that he was in the presence of something genuinely ancient. "Mr. Potter," Ollivander said softly and precisely, "I wondered when I'd be seeing you. Your parents." "Yes, yes." He seemed to be speaking to himself as much as to Harry. Then those pale silver eyes settled on Harry directly, and something shifted in them, a sharpening, a recognition, and then something that Harry might have called alarm on a less composed face. "Curious." "Is it?" Harry said. "Your signature is." Ollivander tilted his head. He reached out and passed his hand through the air near Harry's shoulder without quite touching it, the gesture of someone reading Braille. "Layered. I've measured the signatures of 11,742 wizards in my career, Mr. Potter. I have never felt anything quite like what I am feeling right now." He pulled his hand back slowly. "Let us find your wand." 7 wands splintered, sparked, or simply lay inert. Ollivander's growing excitement was visible. He kept muttering fascinating under his breath and vanishing into the stacks at speed, returning with boxes that got progressively more obscure. The eighth wand was holly and phoenix feather, 11 inches. When Harry picked it up, the mantle in his chest surged warmly, not possessively, but in recognition. The way you recognize a face you've seen in a photograph. This was a compatible tool, not the source of his power, just a channel for a specific kind of it. Gold sparks shot from the tip and scattered across Ollivander's shelves, lighting them in warm flashes. Curious, Ollivander said again, but his voice was very quiet this time. Very curious indeed. The wand that gave you your scar, Mr. Potter, its twin gave us both quite a bit of trouble. And yet, he seemed to catch himself. He smiled, slow and strange. I think we may expect great things from you. Harry set some galleons on the counter. Thank you, Mr. Ollivander. One more thing. The old man's voice stopped him at the door. The other thing you carry, the thing that isn't the wand, isn't the scar, isn't the name. He paused. Be careful that the world doesn't ask you to be smaller than it. Harry looked at him for a moment. It can try, he said. He walked out into the bright noise of Diagon Alley, and Ollivander stood at his window and watched him go with an expression of pure, undisguised wonder. September 1st arrived. Platform 9 3/4 swallowed Harry like a beloved old story swallows a new reader, completely and with enthusiasm. Steam and the smell of pasties and people calling to each other across the crowd, trunks being hauled, owls protesting, small children crying while their parents pretended not to. Harry stood in the middle of it with his cart and Hedwig in her cage and felt, for the first time in his life, that he was in the right place. He found a compartment. He sat down. He opened his standard book of spells. The footsteps that stopped outside his compartment door belonged to, he felt them a second before the door slid open, 2 people. One was bright and buzzing with nervous energy, an intellectual signature that moved fast and grabbed at everything. The other was warm and steady and easily underestimated by people who confused ease with emptiness. Have you seen a toad? The girl said. She had a great deal of bushy brown hair and an expression of someone who had personally taken on the responsibility of finding the toad. A boy named Neville has lost one. I haven't, sorry, Harry said. I can look for it if you'd like. She blinked at him. The if you'd like had apparently thrown her. She'd prepared for yes or no, not for collaboration. Well, are you sure? It's no trouble, I mean. I'm Hermione Granger. She extended her hand with the decisive energy of someone who had read several books about the correct way to introduce oneself. Harry shook it. Harry Potter. Hermione's expression went through several changes very quickly, in a way that Harry found immediately endearing because none of the changes were the ones most people's faces made when they heard his name. There was no reverence, no sudden shyness, no calculating interest. What he saw, briefly but clearly, was recognition, not of the name but of something else. She was looking at him the way she'd probably look at a book she'd been told was exceptional, with genuine, assessing curiosity. Are you? She said. Then, sorry, I've read about you, of course, but that seemed rude to say first. She sat down across from him with the efficiency of someone who had made a decision. I've also read all the set books and some extras too. Do you know what house you want? I've been reading about them and Gryffindor seems best, though Ravenclaw has its merits. The boy behind her, broad shoulders, red hair going in several directions at once, a smear of something on his nose that was trying very hard to be impressive, leaned around the doorframe. I'm Ron Weasley. Mind if he stopped when he saw Harry. Blimey, are you really? Harry Potter, yeah, Harry said and grinned, because Ron's expression was the most purely unguarded thing he'd seen all day. Come in, both of you. Ron sat down, and for a moment the three of them existed in the particular silence of people who have just met and are deciding whether they like each other. And then Harry passed over the chocolate frog cards, and the Birdie Bots, every flavor beans, and Ron started talking about his brothers, and Hermione started asking Harry whether he'd actually read the full history of Wizarding Britain. And the compartment filled up with warmth and noise. And Harry leaned back against the seat and thought that this was what an anchor felt like. The castle appeared from across the lake, and Harry knew in the sight in the warm mantle pulse behind his breastbone that this was a place where very old magic had been laid into the stone deliberately, repeatedly, by people who understood what they were doing. Hogwarts had the quality of a living thing that had chosen to stay where it was placed. It had opinions about itself. This made Harry like it immediately. The boats crossed the dark water. Hagrid called orders and counted heads and got flustered when Neville's toad reappeared. And Hermione quietly revised her toad search strategy while Ron and Harry discussed whether the lake had anything dangerous in it. It did. Harry could feel several signatures in the deep water, none of them malevolent, all of them enormous. The castle doors opened onto Professor McGonagall, and her magical signature was iron and precision, and a very carefully guarded kindness that she deployed sparingly and with great effect. Harry liked her immediately and on good evidence. He did not like the sorting hat exactly, but he respected it. It was the oldest magical object in the castle, old enough that it had a signature entirely its own, layered and strange, the accumulated imprint of 10 centuries of contact with human minds. When they placed it on Harry's head in the crowded great hall, its leathery brim dropping over his eyes, he sat very still and waited. The hat was quiet for a moment. Then it said inside his skull in a voice like dry paper, "Well, this is unusual, is it?" Harry thought back. "Every mind I sit on has rooms. Yours has," the hat seemed to be struggling with vocabulary. "Yours has rooms that open into other rooms that open into vistas. I have never sat on anything like this in 1,000 years, and I have sat on everything." Which house? Harry thought. That's the question, isn't it? The hat seemed to ponder seriously. Slytherin would use you, Ravenclaw would understand you, Hufflepuff would simply love you, which has its own power, but Gryffindor, a pause, Gryffindor would need you. And I suspect you could do with being needed for the right reasons after so many years of being needed for the wrong ones. Harry thought about the crack in the cupboard ceiling, about 10 years of making himself small. Gryffindor, he thought back. Yes, the hat agreed. Then very quietly, in a tone that was less the practiced voice of a magical object and more the voice of something genuinely moved, "Be careful with what you're carrying. It is heavier than it seems, and it will grow heavier yet." "Gryffindor," it announced to the hall. The cheers from the Gryffindor table were immediate and generous. Ron cheered loudest. He'd been sorted 5 minutes earlier and was already looking proprietary about his new table. Hermione, sorted moments after Harry with the same quick deliberation, clapped precisely beside him. Harry sat down and looked up at the high table. Professor Quirrell was seated 3 down from the headmaster. He was staring at Harry with the fixed attention of someone trying to appear casual and failing. The cold, layered thing underneath Quirrell's signature pressed against Harry's awareness like a thumb against a bruise, insistent, trying to get a read on him the way Harry was getting a read on it. Harry held its attention for a moment, steady and unhurried, and then looked away. He looked at the headmaster instead. Albus Dumbledore was extraordinary. Harry had expected something large, and the man's magical signature was large, genuinely, the largest human signature in the room by a considerable margin. Old and deep and layered with decades of conscious, chosen purpose. But what surprised Harry, what made him sit up slightly straighter, was that Dumbledore was already looking at him, not the way people looked at Harry Potter the legend. The headmaster's blue eyes, even at this distance, had a quality of actual seeing, of looking past the surface and trying to read what was underneath. He had the expression of a chess player who has just noticed an unfamiliar piece on the board. Harry met his gaze and did not look away. After a moment, something shifted in the old man's expression. The assessing quality remained, but alongside it came something that Harry catalogued carefully. Surprise, quick and real, chased immediately by calculation, and then this was the one that interested Harry most, a very faint, genuine wonder. Dumbledore picked up his goblet and took a slow sip of pumpkin juice, and by the time he set it down his expression was back to the warm, pleasant grandeur of a headmaster welcoming his students. But Harry had already seen it. The feast appeared, and the great hall erupted into the noise and warmth of several hundred people who were deeply happy about roast chicken. Ron said something that made Harry laugh so hard he nearly inhaled a Yorkshire pudding. Hermione asked him what house he'd hoped for, and he said he hadn't thought about it much, and she said that's either very wise or very concerning, I can't tell which, and he said he didn't know either. Under the table his fingers touched his sock where the silver letter was folded against his ankle. Be worthy of it, be kind. These two things are not in conflict. He looked around the great hall, at the candles floating over the 4 long tables, at the enchanted ceiling churning with slow October clouds, at Neville Longbottom gingerly feeding his toad a crumb of bread across the table, at Percy Weasley explaining something very important to someone who had clearly stopped listening, at the ghosts drifting translucently through the far wall in a loose formation. He felt the castle settle around him like a second skin. He felt Quirrell's cold, layered shadow pressing at the edge of the room. He felt Dumbledore, 3 tables away and elevated on a dais, not quite looking at him but deeply aware of him, the way a careful man is aware of a candle he's left burning in the next room. Harry Potter, bearer of the mantle, boy who lived first-year Gryffindor, ate his feast, laughed at Ron's impression of Percy, listened to Hermione dissect the structural advantages of Gryffindor Tower versus Ravenclaw's spiral arrangement, and felt the warm, cold glow of the mantle settling deeper into his bones with every passing minute. He was going to enjoy this, he decided. Whatever was coming, whatever Quirrell carried in the permafrost beneath his nervous stammer, whatever Dumbledore was planning to do about the unfamiliar piece on his board, Whatever the Ancient One had set in motion the night she'd reached through the veil and touched a crying infant in a destroyed house, Harry was going to meet it on his feet with clear eyes and refuse to be afraid. The candles floated overhead. The ceiling showed stars through gaps in the moving cloud. Somewhere deep in the castle, in a corridor on the third floor that no one was supposed to go down, something old and powerful sat behind its protections and hummed quietly to itself. Harry felt it. He noted its location with the casual precision of a navigator marking a landmark. Then he turned back to Ron, who was building a small castle out of bread rolls, and asked him whether the Weasley family had always been that large or if some of them were recent acquisitions. Ron stared at him for half a second. Then he burst out laughing, and Hermione said honestly in that particular tone she already had for both of them. And the Great Hall roared around them, and Harry Potter's first night at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry began. Later, much later, after the dormitory had gone quiet and Neville's gentle snoring had settled into its rhythm, and Ron was deeply asleep with one arm hanging off his bed, Harry lay in the four-poster and looked up at the canopy. He pressed his palm flat over his sternum, where the mantle sat like a warm coal, patient and vast. "Right," he whispered to the ceiling, to the dark, to whoever might be listening across whatever dimensions existed between him and the woman who'd written him a letter and then left him to figure the rest out. "Let's see what we're working with." He closed his eyes. He let the sight open, carefully the way you open a door in a high wind, managing the force of it, not fighting it. The dormitory dissolved into its true shape, 5 small knots of magical life arranged on beds dreaming their ordinary dreams. The castle spread out around him like a lit map, rooms within centuries of accumulated intent. The wards ran through the walls like blood through veins, old blood carefully kept. And there, down 2 floors and across the 3rd floor corridor, behind a door and then another door and then a door that no student was supposed to reach, something that pulsed with significance. Something being hidden, being guarded, and something else pressing against those guards from the inside, patient and very, very cold. Harry noted it all, catalogued it, committed it to memory. Then he let the sight close gently like pages settling and let himself drift toward sleep. He was 11 years old. He was a first-year student at a school of magic. He had a best friend who built architectural structures from bread rolls and another who had apparently read every book in existence. And he was the heir to something ancient enough that the world's oldest magical hat had sat stunned on his head for 30 seconds. He could work with that. He slept. Chapter 2, The Shape of Things. The first week of classes had a texture to it that Harry hadn't expected, not the magic itself, which he'd known was coming, but the specific human texture of learning alongside people who had been waiting for this their whole lives. Hermione's hand shot up before half the teachers finished their sentences. Ron doodled Quidditch formations on his parchment with one hand while copying notes with the other in a system that somehow produced perfectly legible work. Neville Longbottom melted his 3rd cauldron before Wednesday, and looked so devastated each time that Harry had taken to sitting beside him in potions purely as a gesture of solidarity. Potions was in the dungeons, and the dungeons were cold in a way that had nothing to do with temperature. Professor Snape arrived to his first class the way a weather system arrives, ahead of itself, the atmosphere in the room changing before he'd fully entered it. 30 11-year-olds went quiet with the specific, instinctive quiet of small animals who have sensed something large moving nearby. Harry stayed where he was, hands folded on the desk, and watched. Snape's magical signature was unlike anything else in the castle. Where Dumbledore's was deep and layered with purpose, Snape's was dense, compressed, like something that had been under enormous pressure for a very long time. There were edges to it that were almost painful to read. Grief mostly, rage turned inward until it had become something structural, something load-bearing. The man had built himself around his pain the way a tree builds around a nail, and the result was not comfortable to look at but was, Harry had to admit, genuinely impressive in its own dark way. "You are here," Snape said, his voice moving through the dungeon like cold water, "because the wizarding world requires potions. Not because you have earned the right to destroy my classroom." His black eyes moved across the rows of students with the efficiency of a scalpel. They landed on Harry with a weight that was clearly deliberate. "Mr. Potter, our new celebrity." The room held its breath. "Tell me, what would I get if I added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormwood?" Harry considered the question with the same attention he'd given every other piece of information that week. He'd read ahead. Not to perform, but because the sight told him things about magical interactions that the books only partially captured. Reading the textbook was like getting a translation of something he was beginning to understand in the original language. "The draft of living death," Harry said. "One of the most powerful sleeping potions known. Asphodel is a member of the lily family, which is relevant because the combination with wormwood creates a compound that targets the will rather than the body. The drinker doesn't lose consciousness, they lose the desire to wake. Silence. Snape's expression didn't change, but something moved behind his eyes, quick and involuntary, the magical equivalent of a flinch. He'd expected ignorance. He'd prepared for ignorance. The machinery of his condescension had been loaded and aimed, and Harry had simply not been where it was pointed. "Where did you read that?" Snape said very quietly. "The textbook covers the basic composition," Harry said. "The part about targeting the will was a reasonable extrapolation given the properties of both components individually. Have I got it wrong?" Another silence, longer this time. "No," Snape said, and it clearly cost him something. He turned abruptly to Neville. "Longbottom, where would you look if I told you to find me a bezoar?" Harry settled back in his chair while Neville navigated the question with gallant effort. Beside him, Hermione was staring at Harry with an expression that was half admiration and half suspicion, in the proportions of someone who had expected to be the best in the room and was recalibrating. "How did you know that?" she whispered. "About the will. That's not in the textbook." "I read some extra material over the summer," Harry said quietly. "What extra material? What book?" "I read every book on the set list and several supplementary. It wasn't on any list." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she wrote something in her notebook with an air of someone filing a problem for later systematic investigation. Snape taught the rest of the class with the precise, controlled intensity of someone who has been reminded that a room might contain surprises. He didn't call on Harry again. This, Harry understood, was not a concession, it was a repositioning. Snape was a man who gathered information before he acted. He was gathering. Harry was fine with that. He was doing the same thing. Flying lessons were on Thursday, and the morning air over the training pitch tasted like autumn, cold and bright, leaf smoke somewhere in the distance. Harry stood beside his school broom and looked up at the sky and felt the mantle in his chest stir with something that was very nearly joy. He'd always been fast on a broom. He knew this the way you know something about yourself that hasn't been tested but is simply true, like knowing which hand you'll reach with before you've reached. When Madame Hooch told them to kick off, Harry went up and felt the mantle calibrate to the motion. It extended his sense of space in 3 dimensions simultaneously, so that the air around him had depth and weight and intention, so that he knew where every other student was without looking, so that when Neville's broom jerked panicky and vertical and Neville shot upward with a scream, Harry was already moving. He went after him the way water goes downhill, because it was the only direction that made sense. The broom responded to something beyond his hands, his whole awareness, his whole intention, and he pulled alongside Neville 20 feet up and grabbed his robe and slowed them both, easy and controlled, landing in a neat arc at the edge of the pitch. Neville was shaking. Madame Hooch was already running. The other students were a chorus of noise somewhere below. "It's all right," Harry told Neville and meant it. "You've got it." The broom felt your panic and overcorrected. "Next time, if you feel it happening, don't grab tighter. Loosen your grip." Neville stared at him. "How do you know that?" "The broom told me." "Not in words, it's more like it communicates through the pressure." Harry paused because he was aware this sounded unusual. "Or maybe I'm just making that up and I got lucky." Neville looked at him with large, earnest eyes. "I don't think you get lucky," he said. "I think things work when you touch them." Harry didn't have an answer to that. It was, he suspected, more true than Neville realized. Draco Malfoy was watching from across the pitch, with an expression that had moved past envy into something rower and less comfortable. He'd been about to try something with Neville's Remembrall. Harry had seen it coming in the shift of his posture, and then the opportunity had simply ceased to exist, and Draco was left holding the small glass ball with nothing to do with it. He walked over and held it out to Neville with a tight jaw and no comment. Neville took it, baffled. Harry caught Draco's eye briefly. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Draco's cheeks were faintly red, and not from the cold, and Harry suspected that the look on his face was the look of a boy who had just done something decent entirely by accident and wasn't sure what to do about the feeling it had produced. The first Quidditch practice was at 7 on a Tuesday evening, which was either McGonagall's idea of character building or her idea of a joke, because the pitch was lit by the stadium torches and the sky was the particular navy black of early October, and it was absolutely freezing. The Gryffindor team met Harry at the equipment shed with varying degrees of welcome. The twins, Fred and George, were immediately and enthusiastically delighted, which Harry appreciated, while the captain, Oliver Wood, welcomed him with the focused intensity of a general receiving a new weapon, and then immediately began explaining Quidditch at a level of detail that suggested he'd been waiting for an audience. Harry listened. He asked questions that made Wood look at him with sudden hope. Then he got on his broom in the dark and found the snitch in 4 minutes. Wood made a noise that was nearly a sob. The twins caught Harry after practice, falling into step beside him with the synchronized ease of people who have moved in tandem their whole lives. So, Fred said, "What exactly?" George continued. "Are you?" Fred finished. "First year," Harry said. No, George said. "We've seen first years." "We've been first years. You are not in any meaningful sense a first year." "You caught the snitch," Fred said, "at night in under 5 minutes without apparently looking for it." "I was looking for it," Harry said. "Not with your eyes," George pointed out. Harry considered this. "No," he agreed, "not with my eyes." The twins exchanged a look, that specific silent twin conversation that happened faster than verbal language. Then Fred grinned and George grinned, and they both looked at Harry with the warm, open assessment of people deciding to be genuinely interested in something rather than afraid of it. "Brilliant," said Fred. "Terrifying," said George. "Same thing really," they said together. Harry laughed. "Don't tell Wood how I found it. He'll put something in his tactics binder." "Oh, he'll find out eventually," George said. "But we'll let him have hope for now," Fred agreed. They walked back to the castle in the dark, the three of them, and Harry thought that this was a very good school and he was going to enjoy whatever it threw at him. The thing about Quirrell was that he got worse as October deepened. Not dramatically, not in ways that a person without the sight would necessarily notice. His stammer became slightly more pronounced on days when Harry was in class, which Harry initially filed under coincidence before realizing that Quirrell didn't stammer when Harry wasn't present, based on reports from students in different years who found the professor merely boring rather than disturbing. The cold presence under Quirrell's signature was actively aware of Harry. It pushed against its host's skin with increased pressure whenever Harry was nearby, probing, assessing, trying to get a reading the way Harry had gotten readings all week. Harry held himself carefully unrevealing during defense lessons, which was its own kind of discipline. The mantle wanted to respond to the pressure. It was like holding still while someone knocked at a door, technically possible, requiring active effort. He hadn't decided what to do about it yet. He was gathering. On the last Thursday of October, Harry was in the library working through a chapter on the theory of counter-jinxes. The textbook version, not the page that didn't officially exist, when Hermione sat down across from him and dropped a book on the table with the specific energy of someone who has been thinking hard about something and has run out of places to put the thoughts. "Okay," she said. "I want to ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly, and I want to preface this by saying I'm not asking because I'm jealous, I'm asking because I'm genuinely confused." Harry marked his page. "Go ahead. How did you know about the draft of Living Death? Not the composition, the part about targeting the will." She had her notebook open. She had apparently been researching. "I looked it up afterward, and it's not in any first-year text. It's not in any of the supplementary reading. The analysis you gave is in a potions journal paper from 1987, which is not something a first-year would have access to unless they specifically went looking, and even then," she stopped. "I went specifically looking," she admitted, "and it took me 4 hours." "You found it in 4 hours," Harry said. "That's beside the point. I think that's impressively fast, actually." "Harry," he looked at her. She was looking at him with the exact expression she got when a textbook gave her an answer she suspected was incomplete, steady and patient and entirely undeterrable. He made a decision. "There are layers," he said carefully, "to things, to magic especially. When I look at a magical interaction, a potion, a spell, whatever, I can see how it behaves not just chemically but structurally. The way the components relate to each other. The draft of Living Death analysis wasn't something I read. It was something I derived from looking at the two ingredients and watching how they wanted to combine." Hermione was absolutely still. "Watching," she repeated. "Observing," Harry amended. "I have a kind of perceptual thing, it's difficult to describe." "Is it related to your scar?" He was certain of this. His scar was a wound. What he was describing was something that had been placed in him deliberately, carefully by someone who knew what they were doing. The two things were as different as a burn and a brand. It's separate. Hermione closed her notebook. She opened it again, she wrote something, looked at it, and then looked up. "Can you teach me anything you derive from it?" Harry smiled. "Yes," he said, "that's exactly what it's for." She smiled back, and it was the smile of someone who has just been given a very good problem to work on. "All right, good. That's yes, good." She pulled her book back toward her and opened it to a page she'd marked. "Now counter-jinxes. I think the textbook's framework is incomplete, and here's why." Harry leaned forward and they talked through it for 2 hours. And twice Harry described something he could see in the theory's underlying structure that Hermione immediately cross-referenced in 3 different sources and confirmed. And by the end she had 4 pages of notes, and he had the distinct feeling that she was treating him as a primary source rather than a fellow student, which he found completely reasonable. Halloween came in with the smell of pumpkin and rain. Harry noticed Quirrell was worse that morning. The cold pressure underneath his signature was agitated, running hot and cold in quick cycles, the magical equivalent of a fever. Whatever was down the third-floor corridor was calling to it. Harry ate his breakfast and watched Quirrell not eat his breakfast and thought that something was going to happen today, and that today was probably not the right time to be sitting in the Great Hall when it did. He was in the middle of this calculation when Ron came back from the bathroom with the look of a person who has witnessed something they wish they hadn't. "Hermione's crying in the girls' bathroom," Ron said, sitting down heavily. "Third floor. I may have said something." Harry looked at him. Ron's ears went red. "She overheard me telling Seamus that she was insufferable and nobody could stand her." The red deepened, "which I shouldn't have said even if Seamus was asking." Harry set down his fork. "I know," Ron said preemptively. "I'm not going to say anything. That's worse somehow. You should apologize." Obviously, Ron put his head in his hands. She was upset. She was actually properly upset, not just, "and I said it like it was casual," like. He trailed off miserably. "We'll find her after the feast," Harry said. Right. They didn't need to wait that long. The troll came in through the main doors at approximately 7:45, announced by a very pale Professor Quirrell who staggered into the Great Hall and said "troll in the dungeon" before fainting in a way that Harry's sight told him was largely theatrical. The troll's signature was a huge dumb thump of physical being, enormous and blunt, no magic in it whatsoever, just mass and motion and a club the size of a small tree. The teachers moved. Students screamed. Prefects called for orderly evacuation. Harry was already on his feet. "Hermione," he said to Ron. They moved against the flow of students, up the stairs, 3 floors, and Ron navigated from memory while Harry tracked the troll through the site. It had gone left from the entrance hall, which meant dungeons, which meant the girls' bathroom on the 3rd floor was probably fine, but he wasn't going to rely on probably. The bathroom door, Ron's hand on the wood. "Hermione," Ron started. The wall beside them shattered. The troll was not in the dungeons. The troll had found the staircase, because trolls, whatever else they were, had an animal's instinct for where prey might be hiding, and the 3rd-floor girls' bathroom had Hermione in it, and Hermione was currently making enough noise crying that the troll had made a very logical navigational choice. It filled the corridor with a smell like rotting cabbage and a physical presence like a wall deciding to walk. Hermione backed against the far sink, completely frozen. The club came up. Harry stepped between the troll and Hermione. He didn't do it dramatically. There was no moment of theatrical positioning. He simply moved to where he needed to be, and then he was standing in the corridor with a 12-foot mountain troll looking down at him, and the mantle in his chest was absolutely calm, and so was he. The troll swung. Harry stepped sideways, not jumped, not dove-stepped, with the specific economy of movement that came from being aware of exactly where your body was in 3-dimensional space at all times, and the club went through the space where he'd been and hit the wall with a crack that shook dust from the ceiling. He looked at the club in the wall. He looked at the troll. He pointed his wand. Wingardium Leviosa. He didn't use it on the club, which was the first-year instinct and was reasonably effective. He used it on the troll. The mountain troll went up. All 12 feet and 3/4 of a ton of it, rotating slowly in the air, club dangling from one enormous hand, its expression cycling through confusion and rage and something approaching existential crisis. Harry held the spell steady. The wand was almost unnecessary, the mantle providing the lifting force and the wand merely shaping it, and walked the floating troll backward through the corridor until it was over the large storage cupboard at the far end, and then set it down inside and shut the door. The crash inside was significant. He locked the cupboard with a word in a language that wasn't English and wasn't Latin and existed slightly outside the conventional framework of spell casting. The corridor was very quiet. Ron was pressed against the wall with both hands over his mouth. Hermione had followed Harry out of the bathroom at some point during the levitation and was standing with her arms wrapped around herself, looking at the locked cupboard, then at Harry, then at the cupboard again. "That was," Ron said from behind his hands, "the most insane thing I have ever seen." "Is it locked properly?" Hermione asked. Her voice was steady, which Harry admired enormously. "Yes." Harry put his wand away. He turned to Hermione. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," she said then. You didn't use the levitation to move the club. Everyone uses it for the club. The club's not what was dangerous." She looked at him for a long moment. "No," she said slowly. "I suppose it isn't." Then, because she was Hermione, "What language was that, what you said when you locked the door? It wasn't a standard incantation." "I'll explain later," Harry said. Professors arrived, McGonagall and Snape and Quirrell, running at different speeds that said interesting things about their priorities. McGonagall was ahead by 15 feet. Snape arrived second, dark robes sweeping the corridor, eyes going immediately and analytically to the locked cupboard, then to Harry. Harry saw Snape's gaze drop to his wand hand. Snape was looking for the mark of serious spellwork, the specific way a wand arm trembles slightly after channeling something significant. Harry's wand hand was completely steady. Snape's eyes moved to Harry's face, and something moved in them that Harry hadn't seen there before. It wasn't warmth, it wasn't anywhere close to warmth, but it was something, a recalibration of category. Harry filed it. The troll is secured, McGonagall said, having established this from the sounds inside the cupboard. How? Harry levitated it, Hermione said firmly. Completely, the whole troll. She glanced at Ron. We were worried about my cat, she added, which was the most obviously improvised excuse Harry had ever heard, but McGonagall was still processing the levitated the whole troll information and seemed to let it go. Remarkable, McGonagall said in the tone of someone who will be having a longer conversation about this later. 10 points each to Gryffindor, she added. And 5 to Miss Granger for remaining composed under extraordinary circumstances. She was very composed, Harry confirmed. Hermione looked at him, he looked back. Something passed between them, not words but a mutual acknowledgement, quick and genuine. This is what we are now, this trio, this is the thing. They walked back to Gryffindor Tower together. Ron's hand was steady now, but his eyes were still slightly wild. He kept looking at Harry sideways. Finally, halfway up the moving staircase, the language that you locked the door with. Yeah, what was it? Harry thought about how to answer honestly and usefully, and in a way that wouldn't require explaining the ancient one. The mantle, the silver letter, and the page that didn't exist in anyone else's copy of the standard book of spells. In the 10 minutes before they reached the common room. I'll tell you both, he said, not tonight but soon. He paused. I think you should know what you've got yourselves into being my friends. Ron considered this with the straightforward pragmatism that Harry was already learning was his best quality. Is it very mental? Extremely, Harry said. Right, Ron said. Well, we were already friends with you before you levitated a mountain troll, so I think we're past the point of backing out. Hermione made a sound that was half laugh, half exhale. Agreed, she said firmly. They climbed the rest of the stairs together, and behind them, somewhere deep in the castle, the locked cupboard continued to provide muffled evidence of a very confused troll. Snape cornered Harry the following Monday. Not literally, Snape wasn't a person who literally cornered anyone. He was a person who arranged circumstances so that a conversation became inevitable. Harry was leaving the library alone. Hermione had stayed back to argue with Madame Pince about borrowing period, when Snape appeared at the end of the corridor with the specific stillness of someone who had been waiting. A word, Mr. Potter. Harry followed him to an empty classroom. Snape closed the door. He turned, folded his hands behind his back and looked at Harry with those dark, assessing eyes that never quite gave away what they'd found. I am going to ask you something, Snape said, and I want an honest answer. All right, Harry said. When you answered in class regarding the draft of living death, you did not read that analysis. Number, and in the corridor on Halloween, the spell you used to secure the cupboard, that was not any incantation I recognize. Number and the levitation. Snape paused. I have been teaching this spell for 15 years, Mr. Potter. I know what a Wingardium Leviosa looks like when it's working at the boundary of a student's capacity. That was not at the boundary of your capacity. No, Harry said, it wasn't. Snape looked at him for a very long moment. The thing Harry had noticed about Snape was that he was a man who operated by getting inside other people's heads, by knowing what they wanted, what they feared, what they were hiding, and using that knowledge as leverage. It was a survival skill, Harry suspected, that had been built in very unpleasant circumstances. The problem for Snape was that Harry was extremely difficult to read, and men who rely on reading people are profoundly unsettled by someone who won't be read. What are you? Snape said finally. It was the same question the Weasley twins had asked, and it deserved a better answer than he'd given them. I'm not entirely sure yet, Harry said. I know what I have, I'm still figuring out what I am. Those are two different questions, Snape said. Yes, Harry agreed, exactly. Another silence. Snape moved to the window, looked out at the grounds, and Harry got the impression that this conversation was harder for him than he was allowing to show. Your father was talented, Snape said to the window. Powerful, reckless with it. Your mother, a pause. Your mother had a quality of understanding that was rarer. She saw the structure of magic in a way that most people simply don't. He turned back. You have her eyes and something else entirely that belongs to neither of them. I know, Harry said. It concerns me, Snape said flatly. Why? Because things that are powerful and poorly understood have a history of being exploited. He held Harry's gaze. You are 11 years old and surrounded by people who have agendas. Some of them wear theirs openly. Others, he stopped himself with the precision of a man who has almost said too much. Harry thought about Quirrell. He thought about the cold thing under Quirrell's skin, which was pressing at him even now from 3 floors away with an interest that had sharpened since Halloween. I know about Quirrell, Harry said. Every muscle in Snape's body went absolutely still. Not everything, Harry added, but enough. The cold thing under his signature, it's been getting worse, and it's interested in what's on the third floor. Snape's expression had moved through 5 different things in the last 3 seconds, and he'd controlled all of them faster than most people could have managed one. What settled on his face was something that Harry thought with surprise was relief, the specific relief of someone who has been carrying something alone and has just found out they don't have to. You are not to go near that corridor, Snape said. I know where it is, Harry said. I'm not planning to go near it tonight. Mr. Potter, Professor, Harry met his eyes steadily. I don't think the danger is in the corridor. I think the danger is walking around in a purple turban giving defense lessons. The silence after that was very thorough. No, Snape said at last quietly, the danger in the corridor is real, but he stopped. Go back to your dormitory, Harry went. At the door he paused. My mother, he said. Was she? He searched for the word. Did she see the structure of things the way you described, or was it just magic? Snape's voice, when it came, was stripped of everything that usually armored it. Both, he said. Always both. Harry nodded, walked out. He carried the weight of that word, always, up 4 floors and into Gryffindor Tower, where Ron was reenacting the troll incident with condiment bottles for a deeply entertained Fred and George. And the fire was warm, and the common room smelled like tea and someone's awful attempt at a scent-enhanced candle that was producing something between lavender and old boots. Harry sat in the chair nearest the fire and pulled out his standard book of spells and found the page that didn't exist. The second entry was new. He was fairly certain it hadn't been there yesterday, which meant it appeared when he was ready for it rather than when he looked for it, which was either very sophisticated magic or the ancient one being deliberately theatrical. You lifted a 12-foot troll, the page read. You've been practicing sight without being asked. Good. The mantle is responding to confidence, which is what it requires. There is something in your school that does not belong there, you already know this. You are handling it correctly, observation before action. There is also something outside your school that you haven't felt yet. It has been watching for 3 weeks. It felt you on Halloween when you spoke in the true language because the true language resonates across dimensions and those who know how to listen for it will hear it. You have been heard. This is not necessarily bad, but it will require your attention before midwinter. Second form, transit begins with stillness. Practice standing in one place and knowing it completely, every dimension of it, every moment of it, past and present simultaneously. When you can hold the full dimensionality of a fixed point in your mind without effort, you will be close. The anchor you found, she thinks clearly. Good choice. Harry read the page 3 times, closed the book, he looked up at the fire. The common room moved around him, laughter, homework, chess pieces, arguing, someone's radio playing something that had no right to be called music. The twins were still performing the troll battle for an expanding audience. Ron caught Harry's eye across the room and raised his hot chocolate in a small salute. Outside the school's wards, at a distance that was close enough to matter and far enough to be deniable, something that was not a wizard and not quite human stood in the dark between 2 Muggle office buildings in central London, head tilted, listening to the afterimage of a language it had not heard in 9 years. It smiled. It had found what it was looking for. Harry lay in bed that night with his eyes open, practicing the second form. He chose the dormitory as his fixed point. He knew it physically, the 5 beds, the arrangement of the furniture, the exact angle of the moon through the high window. He held that physical knowledge and then let it expand, let the sight open gently into it, let the room reveal its dimensionality, the moments layered into the stone, the decades of boys sleeping in these same beds, the magic worn into the walls like a path worn into grass. He held it. The mantle in his chest pulsed steadily, warm and patient, like a second heartbeat that kept slightly different time. Somewhere outside the wards, something smiled. Harry felt it, faint and distant, like hearing a voice in another room. A presence that knew the true language, that had heard him on Halloween, that was in its own way keeping count. He didn't flinch from it, he noted it, he filed it. Then he closed down the sight and stared at the dark canopy of his 4-poster and thought about what Snape had said about his mother, about seeing the structure of things. Always both, Snape had said, always magic and something more. Harry pressed his hand flat to his chest. I know, he told the mantle quietly. I'm figuring it out. The warm pulse continued, steady and sure, carrying the patience of something that had waited 10 years and could wait a little longer. Harry let himself sleep. Chapter 3, The Mirror Shows Nothing. December arrived at Hogwarts the way a grandmother arrives for the holidays, loudly, with strong opinions about the temperature, and completely rearranging everything. Snow came first on a Tuesday, thick and fast, burying the grounds overnight so that Wednesday morning's view from the Gryffindor Tower windows was all white and gray, and the particular blue shadow that fresh snow casts on itself. The lake froze at the edges. The whooping willow, irritated by the cold, swatted at snowflakes with increasingly personal offense. Harry stood at the window before anyone else was awake and looked at it all with the sight half open, the way you half open a window to feel the air without letting in the cold. The wards over the castle had tightened with the season. Something about winter made Hogwarts draw itself in, old protective magic pulling close like a coat. He could feel every ward line in the school, running through the stone and the mortar and the very idea of the place. They were good wards. Serious work laid by people who understood what they were building. They had gaps. Not structural gaps, whoever had built the original framework knew what they were doing. But time created gaps the way weather creates cracks in stone. And something had been testing those gaps from outside with the specific patience of someone who wasn't in a hurry. The presence beyond the wards had been there every night for 3 weeks now. Harry had grown accustomed to it the way you grow accustomed to a sound in the pipes, aware of it, tracking it, not yet certain what it meant. It wasn't hostile. Not exactly. But it wasn't benign in the simple, clean way that Hagrid was benign or that Professor Sprout was benign. It had an agenda. It wanted something. He suspected it wanted him. He stood at the window until Ron's alarm went off and the dormitory began its chaotic morning process. And then he turned away from the snow and the presence beyond the wards and went to get dressed, because whatever was coming could wait until after Transfiguration. The last week before the Christmas holidays emptied Hogwarts of approximately 2/3 of its students, and the remainder rattled around the castle like loose change in a very large pocket. Ron stayed. The Weasleys could only afford the train home for so many students at a time. And this year was Fred and George's turn. And Harry stayed because Privet Drive in December was a specific category of unpleasant he'd already catalogued and had no interest in revisiting. Hermione went home to her parents, but only after leaving Harry a list of 7 books she thought he should read over the holidays and a note at the bottom that said, "I trust you to actually read them," unlike some people, with an arrow pointing at where she would have written Ron's name if she'd had room. The castle in holiday mode was a different animal. Teachers relaxed visibly. McGonagall was seen laughing in the corridor on the second day. A genuine laugh, not her usual precisely calibrated smile, and Flitwick wore a hat with small bluebirds sitting on the brim that sang when you walked past. The Great Hall was decorated in a way that made you feel like Christmas itself had taken up residence and wasn't leaving until it had made its point thoroughly. Fred and George Weasley treated the empty corridors as a professional opportunity. Harry helped them test a corridor-length tripwire made of spellotape and a modified tickling charm on the 4th floor, which got Percy Weasley, who had stayed as head boy duty required, and who responded with 7 minutes of outraged dignity before being overcome by the giggles. It was, Harry thought, genuinely the best week of his life so far. He continued the second form every night. He got better at it. The fixed point opened more easily now. The full dimensionality of the dormitory becoming available to him in seconds rather than minutes. He started experimenting with adjacent points, reaching the awareness sideways into the hallway, feeling the corridor as completely as he felt the room. The mantle responded to this with a warmth that he'd started interpreting as approval, which was probably anthropomorphizing a cosmic power but seemed accurate. The page in his book hadn't updated since November. He'd stopped checking nightly and moved to weekly, which felt like the right pace. It was on the 5th night of the holidays, at somewhere past 1 in the morning, that he found the mirror. He hadn't been able to sleep. This happened sometimes. The sight left untethered during waking hours occasionally got restless, picking at the edges of things with the fidgety curiosity of a cat that wants out. He'd learned to walk it off. The empty castle at night was genuinely extraordinary, and he'd mapped most of it by now, the rooms that opened only in darkness, the staircases that led different places depending on the hour, the 5th floor corridor where the portraits all pretended to be asleep but were clearly listening. He had his invisibility cloak, which he'd received Christmas morning wrapped in plain paper with a note that said, "Your father left this in my keeping. It is time it returned to you. Use it well." No signature. He had his suspicions about who had sent it, and the suspicions had a very specific shape, tall half-moon spectacles, twinkling eyes, but he filed it under interesting choices and wore the cloak anyway because it was excellent and it had been his father's. He wasn't wearing it tonight. He decided some time ago that hiding was a thing he was done with. He was on the 3rd floor, not the corridor, the parallel one with the suit of armor that had lost its helmet and occasionally called after students for help finding it when the door appeared. Not literally appeared. It had always been there. But the way the sight revealed things was sometimes like that. A thing was just a wall until it was a door, until the awareness caught the seam of it, the place where stone ended and entrance began. Harry stood and looked at the door for a moment, feeling what was behind it. Old magic, layered with a specific kind of longing. Something designed to show rather than hide. Something that was, in its own way, dangerous in the quietest possible way, not because it could hurt you, but because it could hold you. He opened the door. The room inside was dark, and then his eyes adjusted, and there was the mirror. It was immense, taller than he was by twice, framed in elaborate gold that had gone dull in the dark. Spidery writing ran across the top, Eris stra eru oit ube kafru oit on wosi. He turned it around without thinking, the way he'd trained himself to approach written things, reverse it, read the structure first, and God I show not your face but your heart's desire in about 3 seconds. He turned his attention to the mirror itself. The sight revealed it as layered and intentional. This was not a mirror that had been enchanted, but a mirror that was essentially nothing but enchantment. The glass a secondary consideration to the magic built into it. It had been here a long time. It had shown a great many people a great many things. He stepped in front of it. He wasn't sure what he'd expected. His parents, probably the obvious answer, the human answer, the answer that the mirror was designed to show children who had lost things. He would have understood that, would have sat with it. What he saw instead stopped the breath in his chest. The mirror showed him the multiverse, not as an abstraction, as a view. As if the glass had become a window into the largest space imaginable, which it had. He saw dimensions folded over each other, realities branching from decision points, the whole vast architecture of existence spreading outward in every direction from a single center. Colors that were not colors. Structures that were not structures in any physical sense, but that the part of him that carried the mantle understood the way a musician understands a chord, not intellectually but in the body, in the bone. And at the center of it, at the point where all the branches met, where all the dimensions converged, himself. Not powerful himself, not victorious himself, just himself. Standing in the middle of everything, aware of all of it, holding none of it, not controlling it, not saving it, simply in it, the way a note is in a song, necessary, positioned, part of a pattern too large to see the shape of from the inside. His eyes were burning. He realized distantly that he was crying not from grief, not from pain, but from the specific overwhelm of being shown something true. The mirror wasn't showing him what he wanted. He understood that now. It was showing him what he was, which was a different thing entirely, and which the Ancient One had apparently enchanted into his perception so thoroughly that even the heirist couldn't reach past it to find a simpler desire. He stood there for a long time. The multiverse spread behind his reflection, patient and enormous. That's not what most people see. Harry didn't startle. The sight had felt Hermione in the corridor outside for the last minute and a half. She moved quietly, but her magical signature was unmistakable, bright and quick and slightly anxious in the way that came with caring too much about too many things at once. He turned around. She was standing in the doorway in her dressing gown, hair loose, holding a candle in one hand and looking at him with an expression that was fighting between worry and profound curiosity. No, Harry agreed, probably not. She came into the room because she was Hermione and she was not going to stand in the doorway when there was a room to be in. She looked at the mirror, then at Harry, then at the mirror again. "What do you see? What do you see?" he countered. She hesitated, and the hesitation was itself interesting because Hermione didn't usually hesitate on things she knew. She looked at her reflection. Her reflection looked back, surrounded by something Harry couldn't see from this angle and didn't try to. That was hers. "Books," she said finally, "which is pathetic." "That's not pathetic. It means I want more knowledge. Every version of me in that mirror has more. I look like a professor. I look like I've read everything there is." She paused. "Which I know intellectually I can never do, but apparently my heart hasn't got that message." "Your heart's desire is to understand everything," Harry said. "That's not pathetic, that's actually quite magnificent." She looked at him sideways. "What did you see?" He thought about how to describe it. "Everything," he said. "All of it, every reality, every dimension, and myself standing in the middle of it, not holding any of it, just part of it." Hermione was quiet for a moment. "The mirror shows your heart's desire," she said slowly. "So your heart's desire is to be part of everything, not to master it." "I think," Harry said, working it out as he spoke, "that the mantle I carry, the thing I told you I'd explain, I think it wants to be part of everything. And I think I've been carrying it long enough that I can't entirely tell the difference between what I want and what it is." He looked at the mirror. "Which is something I probably need to think about." Hermione sat down cross-legged on the floor in front of the mirror, with the decisive practicality of someone settling in for an important conversation. "Tell me," she said, "everything, the real version, not the edited one you've been giving Ron and me since October." Harry sat down across from her. The candle between them made the mirror glow. He told her. All of it, the silver letter, the page that didn't exist, the Ancient One's note, the 3 aspects of the mantle, the presence beyond the wards. He told her what Ollivander had said and what the hat had said and what Snape had said without quite meaning to. He told her about Quirrell, about the cold thing under his skin, about what he'd felt from the 3rd-floor corridor. Hermione listened with the focused, total attention she gave to things that genuinely mattered. She didn't interrupt. She didn't exclaim. She occasionally wrote something on the small notebook she'd apparently brought with her because she was the kind of person who brought a notebook to midnight wanderings. When he finished, she was quiet for almost a full minute. The Ancient One, she said at last. Sorcerer Supreme, this is a different tradition from conventional wizardry. Yes, parallel, I think, older in some ways, it's more concerned with the structure of reality than with spellwork. And you have both, not a question. I have both. She looked at her notebook, looked at him, and Quirrell, you're certain there's something inhabiting him. The signature under his is cold and layered and very old and very interested in what's in the third-floor corridor. I'd bet on it. What's in the corridor? Something being protected, something significant given the nature of the protections. He paused. I think Dumbledore put it there deliberately, not carelessly, deliberately. I think the whole arrangement is a calculated trap with the thing in the corridor as bait. Hermione's pen stopped moving. You think Dumbledore is setting a trap? I think Dumbledore is 110 years old and has been the smartest person in every room he's entered since approximately 1910 and has developed very specific habits around letting problems come to him rather than going to them. That's actually a very compelling analysis. I've been watching him. Have you considered, Hermione said carefully, that he's also been watching you? Yes, Harry said. We've been watching each other since the sorting. It's quite collegial. She made a sound that was half laugh, then she was serious again. The presence outside the wards, the one that heard you on Halloween, it's still there every night. And the page in your book says it requires your attention before midwinter. Midwinter, Harry confirmed, which is in about 2 weeks. Hermione closed her notebook. She looked at the mirror again, at her reflection surrounded by its version of her heart's desire, and her expression was the one she got when she'd organized a problem into a workable shape and was ready to begin. Right, she said. So we have Quirrell and whatever is in Quirrell wanting the thing in the corridor, Dumbledore watching you while pretending to watch other things, something outside the wards that heard your cosmic language and has been lurking ever since, and a cosmic power growing inside you that has 3 aspects, one of which you're still learning, one of which involves stepping outside time, and one of which you haven't started. She paused. And we have 2 weeks until midwinter. That's accurate, Harry said. What would you like me to do? It caught him off guard, not the offer but the directness of it. He looked at her in the candlelight. This girl who had sat down in a strange mirror room at 2 in the morning and taken notes on the metaphysics of his existence without blinking and felt something he didn't have an immediate word for. Something adjacent to gratitude but warmer and less temporary. Research the Sorcerer Supreme tradition, he said. There won't be much in the Hogwarts library, but there might be reference points, the magical theory overlap, the dimensional framework. You'll find it faster than I will because you know where to look. I'll start in the restricted section, she said immediately. I can get Professor Flitwick to sign a permission slip if I tell him it's theoretical research. And Hermione, he paused, don't let anyone know what you're looking for, not yet. She looked faintly offended. I know how to be discreet. You absolutely do not, Harry said, but I appreciate that you'll try. She threw his notebook at him. He caught it without looking. There was a pause, and then they both laughed, quiet, trying not to echo in the empty castle, trying not to wake anything that was sleeping. The mirror gleamed behind them, showing 2 children sitting on a cold stone floor, which was not anyone's obvious heart's desire and was perhaps for that reason exactly where they needed to be. Christmas morning brought presents, snow so thick the windows were white squares, and the invisibility cloak which Harry had already decided was going straight into active rotation. It also brought something else, felt before it was seen, in the way things were increasingly arriving in Harry's awareness. At 7:02, as Ron was gleefully examining his Weasley sweater, and Harry was working through a generous box of chocolate frogs from Hagrid, the presence beyond the wards moved. Not toward the castle, it didn't breach anything. But it moved with purpose, circling almost as if establishing a perimeter, as if the circling was itself a message. And wrapped inside the movement unmistakably, deliberately, was a thread of the true language, not a word, a gesture. In the true language there were gestures, arrangements of intent that meant things the way music means things, without translation, arriving directly. This one meant, I know what you are, I want to talk. Harry sat with his chocolate frog card, Dumbledore, predictably, and felt the gesture pulse once and then settle into stillness. He sent back, I know you're there, come properly or don't come. Ron looked up from his sweater. You all right? Fine, Harry said, just thinking. On Christmas, Ron said in the tone of someone who finds this slightly suspicious. Bit grim that, Harry grinned. I'll stop, pass me one of those mince pies from the parcel your mum sent. Ron handed it over with the proprietorial pride of someone sharing something excellent. Harry bit into it, and it tasted of home, someone else's home, the warm, complicated, overflowing kind, and the moment was simple and good, and outside the wards the presence retreated to its usual distance. It was, Harry thought, a reasonable opening exchange. 3 days after Christmas, Harry went to the third-floor corridor. He went alone after midnight in the cloak, moving quietly through the castle with his sight open wide. He tracked everything, every painting, every ghost, every suit of armor, the cat that was Filch's, and moved through the castle with more authority than most of the students. He felt Dumbledore asleep in his tower and felt the quality of that sleep, light, careful, the sleep of a man who had trained himself to come awake quickly. He noted it and moved carefully past the edge of awareness. The door to the corridor was unlocked. He stood in front of it for a moment. The thing behind Quirrell's skin had been pushing at the corridor's protections more aggressively this week. He could feel the mark of its attempts on the ward lines, the places where something cold had pressed and tested. It had felt him too these last weeks, though he'd been careful. It knew he was in the castle. It hadn't quite identified what he was. He opened the door. The Cerberus, 3 heads, massive, smelling of brimstone and something older, was asleep. The music box in the corner wound itself down as Harry watched, and the beast's 6 eyes were firmly closed. He stood in the doorway and looked at the animal with the sight fully open and read it calmly. It was not a guard so much as an alarm. Its purpose was as much to signal intrusion as to prevent it, the magical framework woven into the creature like threading through cloth. He moved past it without touching the music box, moving at the specific pace that didn't disturb sleeping things. Down through the trapdoor, the space beneath was cold and dark and smelled like earth. The devil's snare grabbed at him immediately and then stopped. Plants read magic the way animals read scent, and the mantle's signature was, he discovered this with Neville in herbology, deeply unusual to plant-based magical organisms, which responded to it the way wild animals respond to something too large to classify as prey or predator. The snare let him go and curled away, confused. The winged keys were spectacular and entirely irrelevant. He rose through them slowly, looking at each one, and found the right one in about 30 seconds because correct things announced themselves to the sight the way a plucked string announces its note. He caught it gently and unlocked the door without needing a broom. The chess set was enormous and magnificent. Harry stood at the edge of the board and looked at the arrangement with a kind of professional appreciation. Whoever had designed this, he suspected McGonagall from the quality of the magic, had built it with genuine strategic depth. There was a path through the board that required sacrifice, built into the enchantment as an almost moral test. Harry found the path in 4 moves. He executed it precisely, using the minimum number of pieces, making no unnecessary sacrifices. The White Queen stood aside. The path opened. He walked through a room that smelled of a dead troll and kept moving. The potions room was Snape's work. He'd have known it anywhere, that compressed, dense magical signature, the same quality of intensity he felt in potions class, and it was excellent. 7 bottles, a logic puzzle, fire at both exits. He read the poem carved into the stone and then looked at the bottles with the sight, which was almost unfair to the puzzle, because substances with magical purpose showed their nature clearly, and the right bottle and the smallest bottle announced themselves immediately. He took neither. Instead, he stopped in the middle of the potions room and stood still and looked carefully at what was ahead. The last room. He could feel it, the thing being protected, the thing Quirrell and what was in Quirrell wanted, the thing Dumbledore had placed here as bait. It pulsed with significance, warm and old and very carefully enchanted in the specific way that made Harry think of the Mirror of Erised. He thought about Snape's warning, "You are not to go near that corridor." He thought about Dumbledore's careful watching. He thought about the cold thing under Quirrell's skin, which was tonight, he could feel it from here, moving through the castle above him. He'd come to understand the terrain, not to take the thing, not to engage Quirrell's uninvited passenger, just to know exactly where everything was and what everything meant. He stood for another minute mapping it. Then he turned and walked back through the chess room, through the K room, through the snare, up through the trapdoor, past the sleeping 3-headed dog and back into the normal castle. Quirrell's cold shadow was moving on the 7th floor, which was nowhere near the 3rd, which meant either it had sensed Harry below and retreated, or it had been doing something else entirely. Harry tracked it at a distance until it moved back toward the defense classroom and went still. He stood in the 3rd floor corridor, cloak still on, and thought. The stone was relatively safe. The protections were good and they had an alarm system in the form of a Cerberus. But relatively was doing a lot of work in that assessment, and relatively was not a word Harry was comfortable with when the cold thing under Quirrell's skin was losing patience. He needed to talk to Dumbledore. He'd known this for a while, in the way you know a thing and then spend time confirming you know it before acting. He had enough now. He'd confirmed enough. He went back to Gryffindor Tower and sat by the fire and picked up his standard book of spells and opened it. The page that didn't exist had updated. 3rd form, binding, you're not ready for offensive applications. But you are ready for this, you can hold things in their proper place. This is not a lock and not a shield, it is the assertion that something belongs where it is and cannot be removed by force. Practice with small things first, a book, a door, work up. The presence outside asked you to talk. It is not yet safe to do so, but it will be soon. When it speaks in the true language again, answer with patience, not reluctance, patience. There is a difference, and it can tell them apart. The cold thing in your school has a name you already know. You've known since September. You've been waiting to say it aloud because saying it makes it more real. It's real already. You can say the name. Harry read the last paragraph twice. He looked at the fire. Voldemort, he said quietly to the empty common room. The fire crackled. Nothing dramatic happened. The castle continued to exist around him, solid and very old. Right then, he'd known since Quirrell walked past him in Diagon Alley, that cold, layered permafrost signature, that smell of something that had refused death by doing something awful to itself. He'd known. He picked up a quill from the table and set it on the arm of the chair. He held out his hand, felt the binding and the mantle's warmth, and said quietly, "Stay." The quill stayed. He tipped the chair and it remained in place, fixed to the arm. He applied a small force with his other hand and felt it resist, not like a sticking charm, but like something with genuine conviction that this was where it was. "Good," he said softly. He practiced until nearly 4 in the morning. By the end, he could hold a book in midair, not with levitation, but with the binding, fixing it in its position with such conviction that even banishing it left it floating untouched. He could hold a door open against wind pressure. He could hold a door shut against his own considerable strength. He was thinking in the back of his mind that if you could hold things in their proper place, you could hold a person there too. Hold them fixed and unmoving and completely unable to perform a ritual they'd been preparing for all year. He was thinking that was very probably what he was going to need to do. He went to bed. He slept immediately and completely, the sleep of someone who has made a decision and is content to wait for the moment it becomes necessary. New Year arrived without drama. Students returned from the holidays in stages, filling the castle back up with noise and homework panic and the social reorganization that always happened after 2 weeks away, as if everyone needed to re-establish where they stood. Hermione returned on the 2nd of January with 7 books checked out from her local library that she'd somehow convinced the librarian to lend her by describing them as research for a school project, which was not technically false. She found Harry in the library within 40 minutes of arriving back. "Sorcerer Supreme tradition," she said without preamble, dropping a marked-up notebook on the table. "It predates conventional wizardry by approximately 3,000 years. It doesn't use wands, the tools are different, sling rings for dimensional transit primarily, but those are secondary to the practitioner's own capacity. The magic is explicitly dimensional, it operates on the structure of reality itself rather than within it, which is why Snape couldn't identify your incantation. It's not in any tradition he has access to." She sat down. "Also, I found a reference in a 1340s text on magical theory that describes the Keeper of Boundaries as a distinct magical type, separate from and superior to conventional wizardry in terms of scale, though not necessarily in terms of usefulness, which I found interesting." "Superior," Harry said. "In scale," Hermione repeated, precise as always. "Not in everyday application. You can't make a good cup of tea with dimensional magic." "I could probably fix the dimensions of the cup," Harry said. She looked at him. "I can't tell if you're joking." Partially, he admitted. She opened her notebook. "The dimensional transit, the second aspect, the page said not to attempt it yet." "Yes, how close are you?" Harry considered. "I can hold a fixed point fully, all dimensions, past and present. The page said I needed that before I could attempt transit." He paused. "I think I could almost do it. I'm not going to yet because I trust the assessment that I'm not ready." "Good," Hermione said firmly. "Don't attempt to step outside time until you're certain." Theoretical literature on temporal displacement, she caught herself. "Actually, there's very little theoretical literature on what you're describing because most temporal magic works within linear time, not outside it. What you're describing is something different, more like pausing time locally rather than reversing it." "Yes," Harry said, "exactly that, and binding, you've started that. Since Christmas, I can hold objects, working up to," he glanced around the library, "other things." Hermione knew him well enough by now to understand what other things meant. She didn't pursue it. She wrote something in her notebook, then said, without looking up, "Ron knows something's happening. He hasn't asked directly because he doesn't want to push, but he knows." "I know," Harry said. "He should know the real version. He's Harry, he's actually very steady. People underestimate him because he's not loud about it, but he's the most even-keeled person I know and he would not be frightened off by the truth." Harry nodded slowly. "I know that too, I've been working up to it." "Work up faster," Hermione said. "He helped you with the troll without knowing what he was walking into. He deserves to know what he might be walking into next time." She was right. She was frequently right, and the particular quality of her rightness was that it always had an ethical center, not just a practical one. She wasn't saying tell Ron because it's useful. She was saying tell Ron because he's trusted you and trust runs both ways. Harry told Ron that evening in the dormitory after dinner with the curtains drawn and Neville pointedly asleep, and Ron listened with the expression of someone who is constantly recalibrating but is too fundamentally solid to be knocked over by recalibration. When Harry finished, Ron was quiet for a moment. So, he said, "You're the most powerful wizard alive." "I don't know about alive," Harry said honestly. "Dumbledore is extraordinary, but the thing you have, the mantle thing, that's bigger than Dumbledore's. In scale, in what it touches." Ron absorbed this, picked at a loose thread on his blanket. "And Voldemort is living in Quirrell's head." "Yes, and something outside the school has been listening to you since Halloween." "Yes, and you went down to the stone alone 3 days after Christmas without telling either of us." A pause. "Yes." Ron looked at him with an expression that was entirely genuine and entirely level. "Next time," he said, "tell us first." Harry felt something ease in his chest. "Deal," he said. "Right." Ron lay back on his pillow. "So what do we do about Quirrell?" "I need to talk to Dumbledore," Harry said. "I've been watching and gathering long enough. I have enough to tell him something useful," and he stopped. "And," Ron prompted, "and I think he already knows about Quirrell. I think he's been watching the same thing I have. I think the trap he laid is about to be sprung, and I'd rather be part of the conversation than be moved around the board by someone else's strategy, even if that someone is Dumbledore." Ron nodded slowly. "How do you know he's not already one step ahead of you?" Harry smiled. "He probably is. I just want him to know that I know." He went to Dumbledore's office on a Thursday afternoon and knocked. The gargoyle that guarded it had moved aside before he touched it, which told him either the password was unnecessary or Dumbledore had been expecting him. He suspected the latter. The office was circular and warm and packed with the accumulated significance of a century of serious magical life. Everywhere Harry looked, something had a story that the sight could partially read. Instruments that tracked things he didn't have the context to identify. Portraits of previous headmasters that watched him with alert curiosity. The sorting hat, asleep on its shelf with the wrinkled dignity of great age. Dumbledore stood at the window looking out at the grounds, which Harry had learned was his default position when he wanted to appear casual and was in fact focused completely on whoever had just entered the room. "Harry," he said warmly, "I was wondering when you'd come." "I've been gathering information," Harry said. "I wanted to have something useful to say when I did." Dumbledore turned from the window. His blue eyes were bright and completely attentive. He gestured to the chair in front of the desk, a comfortable chair, not an intimidating one, which was itself a choice that Harry noted. Harry sat. He didn't wait for Dumbledore to begin. "Quirrell is inhabited," Harry said. "The thing inside him is Voldemort or a fragment of him anchored to Quirrell's life force. I've felt it since Diagon Alley. It's been testing the protections on the third-floor corridor for months and it's getting impatient." He paused. "I went down to the stone at Christmas to understand the terrain. The protections are good. They won't hold indefinitely against something that knows what it wants and has nothing to lose." The silence in the office was thorough and specific. Dumbledore looked at Harry for a long moment with an expression that was composed and warm and completely unable to hide the fact that he was genuinely surprised, not at the content of what Harry had said, which clearly he had known most of, but at the delivery. At the fact of an 11-year-old boy sitting across his desk and briefing him with the calm, organized precision of a field operative. "You went down to the stone," Dumbledore said carefully. "To map it," Harry said, "not to take it." "The traps were well made," Harry said. "McGonagall's chess set is particularly elegant. I went through them without disturbing anything. The stone was safe when I left." Another silence. Something moved across Dumbledore's face that Harry was becoming familiar with, the expression he made when he encountered something he couldn't fully account for and was deciding whether to be worried or pleased. "You are not what I expected," Dumbledore said quietly, and it was clearly not a rehearsed line, it was the real thing. "I know," Harry said. "I've seen you watching me since the sorting. I understand why. Something unexpected on the board requires reassessment." The corner of Dumbledore's mouth moved. "I don't think of people as chess pieces, Harry." "I know you don't," Harry said, "but you do think in strategies. You've been strategizing around me since September without talking to me, which I understand. You needed to know what I was before you decided whether I was asset or complication. I'm telling you now so you can decide." Dumbledore was quiet for a very long moment. "What would you like me to do?" he said finally, and it was, Harry recognized it immediately, the same question Hermione had asked him in the mirror room. The question of someone who had accepted the situation and was ready to work with it rather than around it. "Move the stone," Harry said. "Whatever Voldemort is planning, he's planning it for the spring. If the stone isn't here, the trap has no bait, and whatever Quirrell does becomes containable." He paused. "And when the time comes, when Voldemort makes his move, let me be there. Don't move me around the board, let me be a player." Dumbledore looked at him with those old, bright, careful eyes. You understand, he said slowly, that what you're asking is for me to accept that you are capable of handling something that I am not certain I could guarantee the safety of. Yes, Harry said. I'm asking you to trust that. The portraits were all listening, the instruments ticked and spun. The fire crackled in the grate and outside the snow came down in the dark and somewhere in the castle, wrapped in a purple turban, something cold and old and very dangerous was running out of patience. Dumbledore looked at Harry for a long time. Then he said, tell me about what you carry. Tell me what you are, not the legend, not the boy who lived, the other thing. Harry settled back in the chair, and he told him. Chapter 4. The heir and the chamber. The thing about having told Dumbledore was that Dumbledore immediately became interesting in a way he hadn't quite been before. Harry had expected the headmaster to reassess him. What he hadn't expected was for Dumbledore to begin, visibly, if you knew how to look, reassessing himself. It was a small shift, the kind that only showed in the specific way a very controlled person lets their control slip by a fraction in private moments. The way Dumbledore sometimes paused mid-sentence in staff meetings that Harry had no business knowing about but the sight occasionally picked up the edges of, as if he'd thought of something and was revising it. The way the old man occasionally looked at Harry across the great hall with an expression that was less calculation and more something approaching genuine wonder, quickly replaced by the usual warm composure. He was thinking. Properly thinking, not just strategizing. Harry appreciated that. It suggested Dumbledore was actually capable of updating his model of the world when the world handed him new information, which was rarer than it should have been in powerful people. The stone was quietly moved on a Tuesday in late January between breakfast and transfiguration without announcement. Harry felt its absence the way you feel the removal of a background sound you'd stopped consciously hearing, a small, significant silence in the third-floor direction. He met Dumbledore's eyes at lunch and gave the faintest nod. Dumbledore picked up his goblet with the air of a man who had just checked something off a list. Quirrell spent the next 3 days in a state of increased agitation that showed in his stammer and in the cold pressure that pushed outward from him with frustrated intensity. Then it stopped. The pressure evened out. The thing inside him, Harry had been saying the name regularly now, practicing the steadiness of it. Voldemort retreated into its host and went very still. Planning, Harry suspected, not giving up, regrouping, he kept watching. The year ended the way school years end. Not with grace, but with the accumulated momentum of exams and end-of-term performances, and the social mathematics of who had done what to whom and whether that would survive summer. And then with a banquet in which Slytherin lost the house cup in the final moments in a way that Draco Malfoy described to his friends as an outrage, but sat with privately for several weeks afterward. Harry watched Draco at the banquet with the particular attention he'd been giving him all year, incremental, patient, the way you watch a slow, natural process. Draco was angry. He was also, Harry could see now with some clarity, confused by his anger, which was the more interesting part. He'd come to Hogwarts with a complete worldview installed, and the year had applied pressure to it at several points and the cracks were showing. The train home had the particular atmosphere of an ending, everything slightly louder, slightly more present, as if people were trying to absorb the year one more time before it closed. Harry sat with Ron and Hermione in their compartment. Ron ate an entire bag of chocolate frogs in one sustained effort, and felt no apparent regret. Hermione had a list of summer readings she was making Harry take a copy of, and was arguing that the summer was an excellent opportunity to advance theoretical framework, while Ron argued that summer was for not thinking. Hermione, that's the entire point. Harry listened to them and laughed when laughing was right, and looked out the window at the countryside going past and thought about what was coming. Voldemort had been driven off. For now, in the incomplete, bodiless way he'd been driven off 10 years ago in Godric's Hollow. The something outside the wards had spoken twice more in the true language over the spring, and Harry had answered twice more, and the exchange had the character of a conversation that was slowly becoming inevitable. He knew, from the page that didn't exist, that he would need to meet it face to face before his second year. There were many things coming. He looked at Ron and Hermione, Ron now dozing against the window, Hermione making quiet corrections to her summer reading list, and thought about what they'd already walked through with him, and what they'd walk through next, and felt the warm coal pulse of the mantle settle deep and steady in his chest. He could work with this. He could work with all of it. The train pulled into King's Cross and summer began. The summer was 4 things: the Dursleys, the reading list, the binding practice, and the correspondence. The Dursleys had made their usual calculations about Harry and arrived at their usual conclusion that he was best ignored, his existence acknowledged only when it became logistically unavoidable, like at mealtimes or when Vernon needed someone to blame for the garden not being weeded. Harry found this arrangement perfectly comfortable. He had his books, his room now. They'd moved him out of the cupboard after Hagrid's visit, which Harry suspected owed something to Hagrid's size rather than any sudden flowering of generosity, and the long summer evenings in which to practice. The binding had grown considerably since Christmas. He could hold multiple objects simultaneously now, with full conviction, not locking them with spell force but asserting their position in a way that felt, when he did it, less like magic and more like simply being very clear about where things were. He'd experimented with doors, with windows, with the old garden gate. He'd practiced the assertion of belonging. This is where this is what this cannot be removed by anything that has not the same claim to its nature as I have. He'd also started trying the stillness practice in movement, which the page had suggested he attempt in late July. Instead of holding a fixed point while stationary, he tried holding the full dimensionality of a moving location, tracking a point in the garden as he moved around it, keeping its complete spatial and temporal identity fixed in his awareness. This was considerably harder and produced 3 days of headaches before something clicked and the awareness became fluid, following the moving point the way a camera follows a subject. On the 1st of August, he practiced in the back garden in the late evening light, and for exactly 4 seconds the fixed point he was holding became fully present to him in every temporal dimension simultaneously, past and present layered in one view, and he felt, for the first time with complete clarity, the shape of transit. The outline of it, the door if not how to open it. He stopped immediately, sat down on the grass. Let the awareness close. Not yet, he said to the evening air, to the Ancient One's careful instructions embedded in a page that didn't exist. But soon. The correspondence was letters from Ron, letters from Hermione, and one letter that arrived in late July delivered by an owl that wasn't an owl. He knew it immediately. The bird's magical signature was all wrong for an owl, too layered, too specific, performing owlhood rather than simply being it. He took the letter, fed the knot owl a piece of the toast he was eating on the back step, and opened the envelope. The letter inside was written on the dark silver paper. The handwriting was not the Ancient One's. You've been told about me. I won't pretend otherwise. I want to meet not because I mean you harm, I don't, but because what you're becoming is important and the world is changing around you faster than a correspondence through enchanted books can prepare you for. There are things the Ancient One's notes can't tell you because she didn't know they were coming. I know what's approaching. I've been watching the dimensional walls since before you were born. My name is Aldrich Cross. I was the Ancient One's student for 11 years before she decided I wasn't worthy of the mantle. I was angry about it for a long time. I'm not anymore, or not mostly. I'll be in Hogsmeade Village on the 1st of September. Third bench from the left outside the 3 broomsticks, noon. You can bring your friends, I know about them. The one who thinks clearly and the one who is steady, good choices both. Harry read the letter twice. Aldrich Cross. The shadow, the rogue practitioner the page had mentioned in October, the one watching from outside the wards. Not a name he'd known, but a presence he'd felt for nearly a year now, and a presence that had in all that time never done anything except watch and speak carefully in the true language. He wrote back, 1st of September doesn't work. I'll be at school by noon. Late August, Hogsmeade isn't an option for a 12-year-old without a permission slip. The knot owl took the letter back. The reply came the next morning, fair point. Compromising, east corner of Diagon Alley, 23rd of August, 2 o'clock. There's a bookshop called Obscuras that doesn't officially exist. Ask the wall. Harry told Ron and Hermione by letter. Ron's reply was absolutely yes, this is brilliant. Hermione's reply was a full page of risk assessment followed by I'll be there. Diagon Alley on the 23rd of August was its usual glorious chaos. They bought their school supplies in the morning. Second year required a larger book list and Hermione was audibly delighted. Ron was audibly not. And at 1:30 Harry told them to put their bags down in Madame Malkin's for safekeeping and led them to the east corner. The wall was ordinary looking, a dead end between a cauldron shop and an apothecary, slightly grubby, unremarkable. Harry stood in front of it and said quietly in the true language, I'm looking for the door that isn't showing. The wall opened. Ron said, mates. Obscura's books was small and eccentric and organized in a way that suggested the organizational principle was personal to whoever had arranged the shelves, not communicable to anyone else. The books were old, genuinely old, the kind of old where you could feel the decades of handling in the spine, and the subjects were wildly varied. The shop smelled like old paper and something that might have been ozone. A man was sitting at a reading table near the back. He was younger than Harry had somehow expected, middle 30s perhaps, with a lean, angular face and dark eyes that were precise in the way Snape's were precise, though for different reasons. Snape's eyes were dense with contained emotion. This man's were clear and alert, the eyes of someone who paid very close attention and had done so for a very long time. He had the physical stillness of a serious practitioner, someone who'd been taught to use their body as a precision instrument and had practiced it into habit. He looked at Harry and something moved in his expression. Not the reverence the wizarding world sometimes aimed at Harry, and not the calculating interest that Voldemort-flavored attention felt like. This was recognition, and it had a complicated quality, respect, and something older and more personal underneath it. "You're larger than I expected," Cross said. "The mantle sits differently on a child." "I'm 12, Harry said. "I know." Cross gestured to the chairs around the table. "Sit down, all of you. Your friends are as welcome as you are." They sat. Ron was examining the bookshop with open curiosity. Hermione had already identified 2 books on the nearby shelf that interested her and was visibly restraining herself. "You were the Ancient One's student," Harry said. "For 11 years, Cross confirmed. I was 22 when she found me. I could already do things that had no framework in conventional magic. I'd been doing them since I was a boy and had spent most of my adolescence thinking I was going quietly mad." His voice was matter-of-fact, the tone of someone who has processed this history thoroughly. "She trained me, taught me the true language, the forms, the framework of dimensional awareness. For 11 years I was her student, and after that I thought I was her successor. But she gave the mantle to me," Harry said. "She gave it to you before you were born," Cross said. "She told me that the next bearer was already coming. She told me this 6 months before your parents died, and then when they died she said it was done." He looked at his hands briefly. "I left. I won't pretend I was gracious about it. I was furious. I believed I was the most capable practitioner on the planet, and I'd given 11 years to the tradition, and a baby was going to." He stopped. "I spent several years being furious. Then I spent several more watching you grow up from a distance because I couldn't stop." His dark eyes came back to Harry. "I was watching Potter because I wanted to see what she'd chosen over me, what was worth it." "And?" Harry asked. Cross looked at him steadily. "You're worth it," he said simply. "I understood it the moment I heard you speak in the true language on Halloween of last year. The way it sounded in your voice, it was complete. The way it sounded in mine was always," he searched for the word, "rehearsed. I knew the language, but I didn't speak it the way you speak it, and I've practiced it for 20 years. The bookshop was quiet. Somewhere a candle guttered. "What did you want to tell me?" Harry asked. "Your letter said there were things the Ancient One's notes couldn't prepare me for." "Yes," Cross folded his hands on the table. "The dimensional walls, the boundaries between realities that the Sorcerer Supreme is meant to maintain. They've been weakening since 1981. Since the night Voldemort's curse rebounded, the burst of power that transferred into you created a crack in the local boundary. Small, manageable if watched, but something is on the other side of it, and it has been watching the crack for 10 years and it has begun to push." Harry felt the mantle respond to this, a deep, attentive pulse like a seismograph registering a distant event. "What's on the other side?" Hermione asked. She'd been quiet until now, listening with complete focus. Cross looked at her with evident respect. "I don't know its name," Cross said. "I know its nature. It is a being that exists in the space between dimensions, a predator of realities, if that means anything to you. It consumes the structure of existence the way a fire consumes wood. It's been waiting for a crack large enough to push through." "And the crack is large enough," Harry said, not a question. "Not yet, but by spring it will be if the local boundary isn't reinforced." Cross looked directly at Harry. "You can reinforce it, the binding, the third aspect. At full development, you can hold a dimensional boundary in place the way you hold a door shut. It will not be easy, it will probably not be comfortable." "I've been practicing binding since Christmas," Harry said. Cross's eyes sharpened. "How far?" "Multiple simultaneous objects, fixed points in movement, the assertion of belonging." Something crossed Cross's face, quick and genuine, the expression of a teacher recognizing progress they hadn't expected. "The moving point practice, how did you?" "The page suggested it in late July. I worked it out from there." Cross was quiet for a moment. He looked at Harry with those clear, attentive eyes, and Harry looked back, and something passed between them that wasn't words, an acknowledgement, mutual and complete, of what the other person was. "I want to help you," Cross said. "Not because you need guidance, clearly you're managing without it, but because I have 20 years of practical experience in dimensional work and I know the crack's location and behavior in ways that a page in a book won't tell you." He paused. "And I owe the mantle something, I owe the tradition something. 11 years of training and I walked away in anger. I'd like to finish what I started, even if I'm not the one finishing it." Harry looked at him for a long moment. The sight told him the things that mattered. Cross's signature was clear, genuinely clear, no cold layers, no suppressed agenda. What was there was sharp and somewhat melancholy and completely honest. He meant exactly what he said. "All right," Harry said, "but not in secret. Anything you tell me I tell Ron and Hermione." Cross looked at the other two. Ron gave him a straightforward, assessing look that was less about whether Cross was impressive and more about whether he was trustworthy, which Harry thought was exactly the right measure. Hermione had her notebook open. That's reasonable, Cross said. And I won't come to you, Harry said. I'll need to think about how to make contact work from inside a school full of wards. The Nautal managed it, Cross said, and something in his expression was almost humor. The Nautal was clever, Harry conceded. I have several. They talked for 2 hours in Obscura's books. Hermione took 4 pages of notes. Ron asked 3 questions that Cross described afterward to Harry's lasting amusement as deceptively insightful. Harry listened to everything Cross said about the dimensional crack and the boundary work and mapped it against what he knew from the mantle's own deepening instruction. And by the time they left, he had a clearer picture of the shape of the coming year than he'd expected. Ron bought a book about dimensional theory that he didn't entirely understand, but liked the diagrams in. Hermione bought 2 books that she'd identified in the first 30 seconds and had been waiting patiently to pay for ever since. Harry bought nothing, because Obscura's books had 1 volume that the site flagged as genuinely significant, and he was fairly certain the owner wasn't aware of its importance, and buying it felt like theft in the particular sense that bothered him. He asked Cross about it on the way out. Cross glanced at the book and went still. Put it on the table, he said quietly to the shopkeeper. Then to Harry, how did you see it? The site, Harry said. It's alive, not animated alive. There's a consciousness in the binding. Cross looked at him with an expression that was pure, uncomplicated amazement. That book has been in that shop for 30 years, he said. I've been in this shop dozens of times. He stopped. It's a repository, old dimensional knowledge stored in the physical medium of the book itself, not written, stored. I know, Harry said. I could feel it. Cross bought the book. He handed it to Harry at the door without ceremony. Yours, he said. The site found it. The mantle should have it. Harry took it. The book hummed against his palm with the faint warmth of something that had been waiting. They went back to collect their things from Madame Malkin's. Hermione was already reading on the walk. September 1st. The Hogwarts Express, the castle on the hill in the fading light, all of it familiar now, recognizable in the bone-deep way that places become when they've made room for you. Second year had a different texture from first. Harry moved through Hogwarts with the easy confidence of someone who knew exactly where he was. He'd mapped the castle thoroughly over the previous year, not just physically but magically, every ward and working, every room that had opinions about itself, every border between the maintained magic and the older, stranger magic underneath. He moved through the school like a native speaker moves through a language. The new defense teacher was one Gilderoy Lockhart, who had a smile like a person who had practiced having a smile and an extremely high opinion of himself that Harry assessed in approximately 45 seconds as being largely unmoored from reality. His magical signature was genuinely interesting, though not in the way Lockhart intended. It was accomplished in one very specific area: memory work, obliviation, the precise removal and alteration of memory, and curiously thin everywhere else. Harry worked out what this meant in the same lesson in which Lockhart released a cage full of pixies, with the confident incompetence of someone who had written about dealing with pixies without having previously dealt with pixies. The class devolved rapidly into chaos. Lockhart fired a wand spell that backfired into his own teeth, and Harry stood in the middle of the room and rounded up every pixie in the space of 3 minutes using a combination of wandwork and the firm assertion of the binding. Each pixie fixed in its position midair, frozen, collected, returned to the cage one by one with the methodical patience of someone doing inventory. Lockhart watched this process with the expression of a man whose autobiography might need revising. Caught the lot, Fred said cheerfully from the shelf he'd climbed onto. Right then, Harry said, closing the cage. Hermione was making the face she made when she was trying not to laugh. Ron had given up on that effort entirely. Lockhart, recovering, said, "Ah yes, well done, Potter," in the tone of someone generously accepting credit for a collaboration he had not participated in. "Thank you, Professor," Harry said pleasantly, because mocking Lockhart felt like targeting someone already deep in a hole of their own digging, and there was no sport in it. He had, however, now assessed Lockhart thoroughly and filed the assessment. Not a danger, not an ally, largely irrelevant except as an early lesson in the gap between reputation and capability. The chamber opened in October. Not with announcement, there was no theatrical reveal, no single dramatic moment. There was instead a series of things. A message on the wall in the trophy room, written in something that Harry's sight registered as containing real power and real malice. A petrified cat hanging from a torch bracket, Mrs. Norris wide and stiff and alive, but removed from consciousness. Filch's stricken face in the crowd of students being herded away by teachers. Harry stood in the corridor and read the writing on the wall and felt the mantle go alert, a deep, vibrating attentiveness, a compass spin. The Chamber of Secrets has been opened. Enemies of the heir beware. Ron read it over Harry's shoulder. What heir? Slytherin's heir, Hermione said behind them, her voice carefully neutral in the way she used when she was processing something that frightened her and didn't want it to show. There's a legend. The Chamber of Secrets, Salazar Slytherin supposedly built a hidden chamber and sealed inside it a monster that would purge the school of Muggle-born students when his heir released it. A monster, Ron said. Brilliant. What kind of monster? The legend doesn't specify, Hermione said. The texts are unclear. Harry looked at the writing. The power in it was old and cold and specific. It reminded him in texture and in quality of the Horcrux-flavored signature he'd felt radiating off Tom Riddle's diary at the beginning of term, which Ginny Weasley had been carrying and which had made Harry's sight flicker in a way nothing else had and which Harry had spent 3 weeks thinking about. The diary, the piece of soul in it. The opening of the chamber. He put it together on the walk back to the dormitory, moving quickly with Ron and Hermione close behind. The diary Ginny has, he said quietly. The one she got in flourish and blots, someone put it in her cauldron. I saw it happen, I didn't see who. Hermione pulled out her notebook. Lucius Malfoy, she said. I saw him near her at the bookshop. He had his hand near her cauldron during the argument with your father, Ron, when everyone was jostling. She paused. I noted it at the time, but I didn't know what it meant. The diary has a piece of soul in it, Harry said. Tom Riddle's soul from when he was 16. It's using Ginny, it's been using her to open the chamber. Ron went very still. Our Ginny, he said in a voice that was different from his regular voice, stripped down, younger. I need to get the diary away from her, Harry said. Now tonight if possible, he looked at Ron. I'm not going to let anything happen to her, but I need to be fast. What do we do? Ron said. Find out where she is, find out where the diary is, and trust me with the rest. He found Ginny Weasley in the Gryffindor common room 2 days later. Found her in the sense that the sight found the specific wrongness of the diary's influence on her. The cold, dead signature of Riddle's soul fragment pressing against the edge of her own lively, warm, magical presence like rot against fresh wood. She was sitting alone near the window, writing in the diary, and the look on her face was the look of someone in a conversation they didn't realize they were losing. Harry sat down across from her. Ginny, she startled, closed the diary, looked at him with the expression of someone caught. That book, Harry said gently. Can I see it? It's just a diary, I know. He held out his hand. Can I see it? She looked at him for a moment. There was something in her face that was almost relief, the specific relief of someone who has been waiting for someone to notice and is frightened by how much they've wanted to be noticed. She handed it over. The moment it touched his palm, Harry felt the soul fragment inside it slam against its container with sudden, ferocious awareness. Not blind reaction awareness, it knew what was holding it. It pushed against the cover of the book with the desperate urgency of something caged that had caught a scent. Harry tightened his grip and looked at Ginny carefully. Are you all right? I don't know, she said honestly in a very small voice. You should talk to Ron, not tonight. Tonight I need to take care of this, but tomorrow. Tell him what's been happening, he'll listen properly. He held her gaze. None of this is your fault. You were chosen because you're kind and you trusted something that looked trustworthy. That's not a weakness. Her eyes were very bright. She nodded. Harry put the diary in his bag and took it to his dormitory and sat on his bed and looked at it. The soul fragment inside was fully awake now, pressing at the leather cover with cold fury. It was, Harry recognized, one of the most malevolent things he'd ever directly handled, old malice carefully cultivated. The essence of a 16-year-old boy who had been brilliant and terrible and had learned to convert other people's trust into fuel for his own survival. He opened the diary. The writing appeared immediately, dark ink bleeding into the pages without pen, the way Ginny had described to him in those first halting sentences by the window. Harry Potter, it wrote, I've been hoping to meet you properly. Harry picked up a quill. He thought about his options, then wrote back, Tom Riddle. Very good, the diary wrote, you know my name. She talked about you, the famous Harry Potter. She wrote pages about you actually, which was rather useful. What do you want? Harry wrote, to be free. To complete what was begun in the chamber, to open it fully. What I've done so far is preparation. A pause measured in the brief moment before new ink appeared. What do you want, I wonder? Why are you holding the diary instead of destroying it? Harry considered. Because I want to know where the chamber is before I close it permanently. A longer pause this time. The soul fragment behind the writing was recalibrating. Harry could feel it pressing and testing the cover of the diary the way Voldemort's fragment had tested the third-floor protections and finding the same thing, something that wasn't behaving the way prey was supposed to behave. You're not afraid of me, the diary wrote, and there was something in the quality of the written words that was harder to name than simple text. The fragment had pushed enough of its personality into the writing that the words had texture. Surprise carefully managed, and underneath it, faint but present, the first stirring of genuine caution. No, Harry wrote back, you should be. I am the memory of the most powerful dark wizard of the 20th century at his most focused. I have opened this chamber before, I know what lives inside it. A basilisk, Harry wrote. King of serpents, kills with a look can be controlled by a parselmouth. The entrance is in the girls' bathroom on the second floor, moaning Myrtle's bathroom. The sink. The tap with the small snake engraved on it. Another pause. Longer. How do you know that? I've been finding things out all year, Harry wrote. You've been useful, actually. The cold signature of what you are told me a lot about what Voldemort does to make himself persistent. The soul-splitting. The anchoring, useful to understand. He paused, then added, you're going to tell me the rest now. The exact layout of the chamber, everything past the entrance. The diary was still for a full 10 seconds, and if I don't. Then I destroy the diary without knowing, Harry wrote pleasantly, which is worse for you than telling me, since you've apparently got enough self-preservation instinct to be calculating rather than just violent. You are nothing like I expected, the diary wrote, and the words had the quality of something said against the writer's will. I've heard that before, Harry wrote. He went to the chamber on a Saturday alone at 2 in the morning. Ron had argued about the alone part with genuine feeling and excellent points, and Harry had listened to every point and agreed with most of them and said that the basilisk's method of killing was a direct look, and that he was not willing to manage that risk with Ron in the room. Ron had said he would close his eyes. Harry had said the basilisk was 60 feet long and moved extremely fast, and closed eyes were not sufficient protection. Ron had said, I'll be back in an hour, Harry had said. If I'm not back in 2 hours, go to Dumbledore. That's not Ron. Ron had looked at him with those straightforward, steady eyes. Come back, he said. I will, Harry said, and meant it fully. He went to moaning Myrtle's bathroom, which was cold and damp and reeked of the particular despair of a ghost who had been haunting the same location for 50 years. Myrtle herself was absent, off flooding another bathroom probably, which she did when her feelings were large. Harry found the tap. The small engraved snake caught the sight immediately, enchanted, old, specifically keyed to Parseltongue. He spoke to it. The snake uncoiled in the metal and the sink rotated and the pipe opened, dark and dropping. He went down. The pipe was long and smelled like old stone and water and something else, something living and large and very old. Harry dropped into a dark tunnel and oriented himself immediately, the sight spreading out around him, mapping the space. He moved forward through the damp dark with his wand lit, and his senses fully extended, feeling the chamber's architecture, the Slytherin-era wards deep in the stone, the distant rhythm of something enormous breathing. The bones of small animals were a detail he noted and passed. The shed skin of the basilisk, 40 feet long, translucent and magnificent, was a detail he stopped at briefly, marveling. Then moved on. The door with the carved serpents. He spoke. It opened. The Chamber of Secrets was extraordinary. That was the thing nobody had mentioned in the legends, not just sinister but genuinely extraordinary. Slytherin had built it with the same intention that he'd built his common room, the same love of grandeur and depth, and the specific aesthetic of power made architectural. The stone columns stretched into darkness above, carved with intertwining serpents that the sight read as alert and enchanted and watching. The water on the floor reflected Harry's wandlight in long, rippling columns. At the far end, the stone statue of Slytherin himself, eyes carved to an upward angle, mouth open in a way that served a specific purpose Harry already understood. In front of it, Ginny was lying on the stone floor. Harry moved to her immediately and crouched and pressed 2 fingers to her wrist. Pulse present, steady, unconscious, not dead. Good. He checked her magical signature and found it dim but intact, the riddle influence reduced now that the diary had been taken. He stood up. He looked at the statue. He looked at the open mouth. I know you're in there, he said in Parseltongue because it seemed appropriate. Come out. 30 seconds of deep, pressurized silence. Then the basilisk came. It moved like the physical embodiment of the word massive, thick as an oak tree, its body filling the center of the chamber in successive coils, its scales catching the wandlight in dull green-gold flashes. The sound of it moving on the stone was the sound of something that had been here for 1,000 years and intended to continue. Its head was the size of a small car. Its eyes, Harry turned his back the moment he heard the scales accelerate. He faced the far wall, eyes closed, and extended the sight fully instead, because the sight didn't use physical eyes, it used a different sense entirely. And a basilisk's lethal gaze traveled along the light spectrum in a way that the sight didn't share. He could see the basilisk perfectly in the sight. Every scale, every coil, the enormous head swinging toward him with the instinct of 60 feet of evolved predator. He also saw now what was coming through the statue's open mouth. The diary's soul fragment, freed from the destroyed book, he'd left it intact until now deliberately, manifesting in a form that was gaining substance from Ginny's draining life. A translucent shape that was becoming more solid as Ginny became less so. A 16-year-old boy made of stolen years. Tom Riddle stood in the chamber and looked at Harry from 20 feet away and said, in a voice that was gaining resonance with every second, "Kill him." The basilisk struck. Harry sidestepped the same sideways step he'd used against the troll, that specific economy of movement, and felt the wind of the enormous head going past, close enough to disturb his hair. He raised his left hand, not his wand hand, and said in the true language, "Stay." The binding went out from him like a wave. The basilisk froze, not petrified, not unconscious. Fixed. Every coil, every scale, the enormous momentum of 60 feet of moving serpent simply stopped. The binding held it with the same total conviction with which Harry held doors and windows and the positions of stars. And the serpent was massive, but the mantle was more fundamental than mass, and it held. The chamber went completely silent. Tom Riddle stared. Harry turned around. He kept his eyes on Riddle's translucent form, not the basilisk, and walked toward him steadily. "You're weakening her," Harry said, nodding at Ginny. "Stop." Riddle looked at him with the expression of someone who has just had their best option removed and is rapidly cataloging the alternatives. Even as a soul fragment manifesting from stolen life, his intelligence was visible, sharp and cold and adaptable, recalculating in real time. "You held the basilisk," Riddle said. "With what? That's not any magic in my understanding, and I have a comprehensive understanding." "I know you do," Harry said. "You built this chamber at 16 and you made a soul anchor out of a 16-year-old's diary, and you found a host family's daughter to use as your instrument. You're extraordinary, Tom, you always were." He held Riddle's gaze. "You're also losing. Stop drawing on Ginny's life and we can talk. If she drops below a certain level, I'm going to have to prioritize her over this conversation, which will end it faster and less comfortably for you." Riddle looked at him for a long moment. Then the drain on Ginny slowed. Harry felt it in her signature strengthening incrementally. "Voldemort," Riddle said, with the pride of someone saying their own name as a title. "That's who I become. The greatest dark wizard in history. You become a man so afraid of death that he commits acts of profound violation to avoid it," Harry said, "multiple times over, and in doing so you become less yourself with each one, which is the part I find genuinely tragic because the intelligence was real. Tom Riddle at 16 was genuinely remarkable." Riddle stared at him. "You're 12 years old." "Yes," Harry agreed. "And you're a fragment of a soul anchored to a diary. We're both doing reasonably well given the circumstances." Something crossed Riddle's face, rage, clean and total, and Harry felt him push at the basilisk with his parcel-tongue control and felt the binding absorb the push without movement. The basilisk stayed fixed. Its eyes were closed, which Harry appreciated. "The diary," Riddle said, "you destroyed it." "Not yet," Harry said. "I needed to talk to you first." "And now?" Harry looked at him steadily. "Now I'm going to ask you something, and I want an honest answer because I think somewhere in that fragment there's still enough of the original person to give one." He paused. "Was there a moment when you could have chosen differently, when it was still a choice?" Riddle was silent. 11 years old," Harry said. "On a train, going to Hogwarts for the first time, before the chamber, before the diary, before any of it. Was there a moment when it could have gone another way?" The silence in the chamber had a different quality now. "Why does that matter?" Riddle said, and his voice had lost some of its resonance, something underneath the performed certainty briefly exposed. "Because I want to understand you," Harry said, "not the legend, you." Another silence. "Yes," Tom Riddle said very quietly, and for a fraction of a second the translucent face looked young. "There was a moment." Harry nodded. "Thank you," he said. Then he took the diary from his bag, set it on the stone floor and held out his hand. The binding went into the diary differently than it went into physical objects, not asserting position but asserting nature, reaching into the soul fragment's anchoring and holding it to its own essential truth, which was that it was a fragment, incomplete, not whole, not real, not what Voldemort had intended it to preserve. The fragment convulsed. Riddle's form flickered. "What are you?" he said. "Returning things to their proper state," Harry said quietly. "The diary didn't need destroying. It needed the thing inside it to be unmoored from the anchor, needed the anchor itself to be held open, fixed open, so that nothing could close inside it again." Harry held the binding steady and felt the soul fragment lose its purchase and begin to disperse, not destroyed but freed from the false container, released into whatever came after the insult of being split and trapped. Tom Riddle looked at Harry in the last moment of his coherence. "You're going to stop him," Riddle said, not a threat. "Something more like recognition. You're going to stop what I become." "Yes," Harry said. Tom Riddle, age 16, the boy who had once stood on a train platform and felt the first pull of a choice that would take decades to complete, dissolved. The chamber went silent. The basilisk, released from the binding, lowered its enormous head slowly and lay still on the stone. Harry looked at it for a moment. In the sight it was magnificent, no malice of its own, only the nature it had been born with and the 1,000 years of isolation and conditioning that had shaped it into what it was. "Sleep," he told it in parcel tongue. The basilisk closed its eyes. Harry went to Ginny and crouched beside her and put a hand on her shoulder, carefully and precisely sending warmth through the connection, not healing magic which he didn't have formally but the binding's cousin, the assertion that she belonged here, that she was herself, that nothing had successfully taken what was essentially her. Her signature brightened steadily. She woke up coughing, confused, cold. Harry helped her sit up. "You're all right," he said, "it's over." She looked around the chamber with wide, disoriented eyes. I can't remember how I got here. That's normal. The diary was the memory. The diary's gone now." She looked at him, her eyes filled. "You're all right," he said again firmly. "Come on, let's go home." He walked her out of the chamber, past the fixed and sleeping basilisk, through the serpent doors, through the dark tunnel, and up through the pipe into the cold, damp air of moaning Myrtle's bathroom, where Myrtle herself appeared out of the ceiling and shrieked with delight at having visitors at this hour. Harry took Ginny to the hospital wing. He woke Madame Pomfrey, who asked no questions a good healer didn't need to ask. He told her Ginny had been in the Chamber of Secrets and needed looking after. Pomfrey's expression was everything Harry needed to know about how a professional responds to extraordinary information. She filed it and acted. He walked back to Gryffindor Tower in the grey pre-dawn, carrying the empty diary and the basilisk fang he'd pocketed on the way out, and thought about Tom Riddle saying there was a moment. He thought about that for a long time. Ron was awake in the common room, sitting by the dead fire wrapped in his dressing gown, and when Harry came through the portrait hole, Ron stood up and looked at him in a way that covered about a dozen things at once, all of them genuine. "Ginny," was what he said. "She's fine," Harry said. "Hospital wing. Madame Pomfrey has her." Ron closed his eyes briefly, then opened them. "You look like you've been in a fight with something enormous." "I held a basilisk in place with dimensional binding and dissolved a soul fragment that was anchored to a diary," Harry said. Ron stared at him. "So, medium-intensity evening," Harry added. Ron sat back down heavily and put his face in his hands, and the sound that came out of him was half laugh and half something much more relieved than that. And Harry sat beside him on the old sofa, and they sat together in the dead fire quiet of the common room and let the night move past them toward morning. The diary sat on the table between them. Empty now, its pages blank, the cold gone from it entirely, just a book, just leather and paper, the prison evacuated and the prisoner no longer a prisoner. Harry picked it up and looked at it one more time. There was a moment. He set it down. Outside the castle windows, the sky went from black to gray to the first tentative pale blue of a day that was going to be fine. Chapter 5. The weight of the mantle. Third year arrived the way significant things often do, not dramatically, but with the particular accumulation of small details that, in retrospect, you recognize as the shape of something larger pressing through from the other side. It started on a train. Not the Hogwarts Express, that came later. This was the night bus, which Harry had taken at the start of August after an incident with a hover charm and a bowl of pudding that had, in Harry's estimation, been largely Dobby the house elf's fault, and entirely Vernon Dursley's problem to clean up. He'd packed his trunk in 4 minutes, walked out of Privet Drive in the warm August dark, and stood on the empty road and held out his wand hand. And the night bus had arrived with a bang and a screech, and the deeply unimpressive welcome of a spotty conductor named Stan Shunpike. Harry paid his 11 sickles and sat in the upper bunk, while the bus lurched through England at speeds that suggested the driver had a personal disagreement with the concept of traffic laws, and read about Sirius Black. The conductor had a copy of the Daily Prophet with Black's face on the front, a photograph so the face moved, grinning the grin of someone who had been photographed in the immediate aftermath of something terrible. And the grin had never left because photographs never moved forward, only repeated. Harry looked at the face and let the sight open and then frowned because Sirius Black's face in a photograph told him nothing useful, which he'd expected, but the quality of nothing was unusual. Most photographs of people carried the faintest residue of the person who'd been photographed, a ghost of a magical signature barely there but detectable if you looked carefully. Sirius Black's photograph had nothing, a complete absence where something should have been. Harry filed it. The Prophet said Black was dangerous. The Prophet said Black had murdered 13 people. The Prophet said he'd been Voldemort's closest supporter, had betrayed the Potters, and had escaped Azkaban for the first time in the prison's history, which was frankly impressive regardless of everything else. Harry looked at the photograph again, the grinning face, the absence. He put the paper down and looked out the window at the rushing dark. Something was wrong about the story. He couldn't identify what yet, but the site was the world's most reliable nonsense detector, and it was flagging the official narrative of Sirius Black the way it flagged Quirrell's stammer, as a performance, as a surface over a different truth. He'd need more information. Hermione had a time turner. Harry discovered this on the first day of term when she appeared at breakfast for arithmancy at 9, then reappeared at 9:15 for Muggle studies, and Harry did the arithmetic of simultaneous locations in his head and said, over his porridge, "McGonagall got you a time-turner." Hermione went very still. "How did you? You were in 2 places. I felt your signature in both." He passed her the marmalade. "Can I see it?" She looked around the table. Ron was deep in an argument with George about Quidditch seating arrangements. Everyone else was absorbed in their own mourning, and quickly pulled a small, glinting hourglass on a chain from inside her robes. She held it toward him without releasing it from around her neck. Harry looked at it with the sight fully open. The device was extraordinary, not large, not dramatic, but the magic concentrated in it was extraordinary in the way that very precise, very intentional things are extraordinary, like a watch mechanism, where the craftsmanship only reveals itself to the right kind of attention. It manipulated local time in a tight radius, walking the wearer backward in controlled increments. He looked at the chain. The chain was gold. He looked at the hourglass's sand, which was currently still. He looked at the mechanism's relationship to the person wearing it and noticed something that made him look twice. "This is keyed to you specifically," he said. "Yes, McGonagall registered it with the Ministry. There's a hole. No, I mean the enchantment is keyed to your magical signature. It would only turn for you. If someone else tried to use it, the Ministry considered that," Hermione said. "Misuse prevention." Harry nodded. He handed it back, or rather stopped looking at it, since she hadn't let him hold it, and went back to his porridge. The time-turner sat against Hermione's chest and ticked in the faintest possible way, audible only if you were paying the specific kind of attention Harry paid to things. He filed it. Not as a tool, it wasn't his tool, and he wouldn't treat it as one, but as a fact about the landscape. Sometimes facts about the landscape became relevant. The new defense teacher was a man named Remus Lupin, who arrived looking like someone who had put considerable effort into appearing merely tired, when in fact something more complex and enduring was going on. His robes were clean but patched. He had the carefully maintained dignity of someone who had been managing reduced circumstances for a long time without complaint. He fell asleep on the train from London, according to students in other compartments who had found this alarming, and woke up somewhere near Aberdeen with complete composure, as if waking up in public in front of students was entirely within normal parameters. Harry's sight on him was interesting. Lupin's magical signature was warm and controlled, and layered with what Harry had learned to recognize as the quality of someone who had spent decades managing something private and difficult, with a great deal of personal integrity. There was also something underneath it, not cold, not malevolent, nothing like Quirrell's horror, but large, something large and wild and carefully contained. It was the magical equivalent of a river that had been running in a very disciplined channel for 30 years. The force of the water was apparent in the precision of the banks. Harry knew what a werewolf signature felt like from theory, from the repository book Cross had given him. He matched the theoretical to the actual, and arrived at his answer in the first 5 minutes of being in Lupin's vicinity. He told no one because it was Lupin's private business, and because Lupin's contained river quality suggested the matter was very thoroughly managed, and because by the time their first defense lesson happened Harry had already decided that this was the best teacher Hogwarts had presented him with. Not the most powerful, not the most dramatic. The best, in the sense of someone who understood teaching as a discipline in itself, who knew that confidence was a skill that required practice the way any other skill did, who set up the boggart lesson with the methodical thoughtfulness of someone who had planned each student's experience individually. Harry watched Neville face a Snape in his grandmother's clothes and laughed genuinely, and felt something warm about a teacher who had thought carefully enough about each person in the room to know what would help them. When it was Harry's turn, Lupin stepped in front of him before he could approach the wardrobe. "Not this time, I think," Lupin said pleasantly. "Why not?" Harry asked. Lupin looked at him steadily. He had gray eyes worn at the corners. "Because I'm not certain what form a boggart would take for you," he said, which was honest in the way that good teachers could sometimes be honest, no performance, just the truth. "And I'm not prepared for it today." Harry looked at him. "You've heard about me. A little enough." Lupin's voice was careful and warm and genuinely interested. "Enough to think that whatever the boggart produced might require more management than a classroom exercise should involve." Harry thought about what the boggart would show him. He turned it over seriously and arrived at his honest answer: probably nothing. He'd sat with the biggest fears he could access: death, failure, losing Ron and Hermione, and none of them had the visceral, immediate quality that produced a boggart response. Fear required a specific kind of surprise, and Harry moved through the world with too much advance awareness for most fears to surprise him. What it might show him instead was something he hadn't consciously acknowledged yet. He stepped back and let the moment pass. Lupin caught his eye afterward as the class was leaving and said, "A word, Mr. Potter." The classroom emptied. Harry waited. "You weren't afraid," Lupin said, not accusatory, observational. "I don't think so," Harry agreed. "The boggart would have found something," Lupin said. "Boggarts always find something." "What do you think it would have shown?" Harry asked, genuinely curious. Lupin considered this with the seriousness it deserved. "I think," he said slowly, "it might have shown you something about the mantle. Something about what carrying it costs." He paused, "Which would be appropriate and none of my business." Harry looked at him with fresh attention. "You know what the mantle is." "I know what the Sorcerer Supreme tradition is," Lupin said. "I knew your mother, Lily she had a quality of vision that went beyond conventional magic. She and I had long conversations about it in 7th year. She mentioned the tradition, she'd been reading about it." He was looking at the wall behind Harry, at something that wasn't there. "She said she thought magic was bigger than wizards had made it. That the framework of Hogwarts, of the whole wizarding tradition, was like a map that only showed one country." Harry was very still. "She was right," he said. "I know," Lupin said quietly, then coming back, "I knew your father too, James. He was a genuine smile, brief and full of something. He was the best of us in the ways that mattered for the moments that mattered, which is not quite the same thing as being the best of us generally, which he absolutely was not." The smile deepened for a moment. "He would have enjoyed you enormously." Harry looked at him. He thought about Snape saying always both in that stripped-bare voice. He thought about Lupin saying the best of us with that complicated love. He was always, he realized, learning about his parents from the edges, from what other people said in unguarded moments, not from portraits or memories or direct accounts, just the shadows his parents cast on the people who had loved them. "Thank you," Harry said. He meant it broadly. "Of course," Lupin said. He turned to the board and began erasing the day's notes. "Come back if you'd like to practice. The third-floor classroom is unlocked on Tuesday evenings." He paused. "No boggarts," Harry smiled. "I'll be there." The Dementors were the problem. Not politically, Harry understood their presence exactly. Cornelius Fudge had stationed them at Hogwarts because Sirius Black was allegedly coming for Harry, and Fudge's decision-making leaned heavily toward actions that looked decisive without requiring difficult thought. The problem was what the Dementors did to Harry's sight. Every other magical entity Harry had encountered registered clearly, signatures he could read, measure, file. Dementors had no signature. They had an absence, a negative space, a void that the sight fell into and came back from shaken, the way a hand falls into a pot of cold water before the mind processes that the temperature is dangerous. The first encounter was on the Hogwarts Express when the train stopped in the dark and the carriage went cold. Harry felt the Dementor before it reached their compartment, not through the sight, through the mantle, which responded to it with something Harry hadn't felt from it before, a deep structural shuddering, the way a building shudders when something very large passes close. The mantle was not afraid of many things. It was afraid of this. Not afraid, that was the wrong word. Wary in the specific way that something ancient is wary of something that threatens its fundamental nature. Dementors ate the things that made a person themselves, and the mantle was Harry, more deeply woven into his selfhood than anything else. They were natural enemies in a way that had nothing to do with magic and everything to do with existence. The cold hit, the darkness pressed. And Harry heard it, the voice he always heard when his scar throbbed in the wrong way. Except now it was clearer, closer, not a scar memory but an actual memory surfacing under the Dementor's influence. A woman's voice, high and frightened, and then a man's voice. And then he came back to himself with Lupin crouching in front of him and a piece of chocolate being pressed into his hand, and the carriage bright again with the Dementor retreated. Hermione had her hand on his arm. Ron was very pale. "Here," Lupin said about the chocolate. "Eat it, all of it." Harry ate it. The warmth was genuine, not pleasant exactly, more like emergency warmth, the kind that tells you how cold you actually were. "I heard my mother," Harry said flatly, because Lupin deserved the truth and also because saying it aloud was better than carrying it in the dark. Lupin went very still. "The night she died," Harry said, "I could hear her." He looked at Lupin steadily. "I'm all right, but I need to learn the Patronus." "Yes," Lupin said, quietly but with certainty. "Yes, you do." "Tuesday evenings," Harry said. "Tuesday evenings," Lupin confirmed. The Patronus charm was theoretically a spell. Harry understood this. It had an incantation and a wand movement and a magical mechanism that pushed positive memory into physical form to drive off the darkness. In practice, for Harry, it was something else entirely. He understood why within 3 Tuesday sessions. The Patronus was a defense against Dementors, and Dementors operated on the soul, on the essential selfhood of their target. For most witches and wizards, a Patronus was a projection of positive memory, a constructed barrier of joy and love and warmth between the self and the void. For Harry, whose selfhood was layered with the mantle, whose essential self included the dimensions and the boundaries and the true language and the vast, warm, alive architecture of existence, the Patronus wasn't drawing on a memory of a thing that had made him happy. It was drawing on what he was. The first time it worked, truly worked, not the wispy, silvery nothing of early attempts. It didn't look like a stag. It started like a stag. The shape was right, the 4 legs, the proud head, the antlers, his father's form. The hereditary shape that the Patronus charm reached for through bloodline and magical history. But as it solidified, something else happened. The stag's form began to refract. Not dissolve, refract, the way light refracts through a prism, each angle of the form showing a different depth of the same thing. The antlers branched into structures that weren't antlers. The stag's body contained geometries that weren't stag anatomy. It was the stag and it was the mantle shape. And it was something that existed in 3 dimensions and also in several more, all simultaneously, all elegantly arranged into the form of a running animal made of silver fire. Lupin stood at the edge of the room and watched it with both hands at his sides, and his expression was the most naked Harry had ever seen on an adult's face. Pure, unguarded wonder, and underneath it, grief that was also wonder. Because the thing in front of him was James Potter's Patronus, and also something James Potter had never imagined, and both of those truths were visible at once. The Dementor substitute, a chest Lupin had borrowed from the defense storeroom, with a Dementor simulating enchantment, retreated to the far wall. The silver stag stood in the middle of the classroom and burned. That, Lupin said very quietly, is the most extraordinary Patronus I have ever seen. It's a stag, Harry said, slightly breathless. It's also considerably more than a stag, Lupin said. Harry, what does it feel like when you cast it? Harry lowered his wand and the Patronus faded. He stood for a moment, feeling the echo of it, the specific quality of what he'd drawn on. Like being completely myself, he said, not a memory, like pulling from what I am rather than what I've experienced. Lupin looked at him for a long moment. Your mother once described a thing she could do, he said slowly, that she called reaching the source rather than the surface. She meant it as a theoretical concept, a direction magic could go. He paused. She would have been very pleased with you. Harry sat down in the nearest chair because his legs were slightly less steady than he wanted them to be, and he didn't pretend otherwise. Tell me something about her, he said. Something specific, not the legend. Lupin sat down across from him. The classroom was empty and quiet and smelled like chalk and old wood. She laughed at things that weren't immediately obvious as funny, Lupin said. She had a 3-second delay sometimes, like she was translating the joke into the language she thought in, which was a different language from everyone else's. And then she'd laugh properly at something that everyone else had moved past. He smiled. James used to tell jokes hoping she'd get the delayed laugh specifically. He said it was his favorite sound and he'd wait as long as it took. Harry looked at the floor. She was also, Lupin continued more quietly, furious at injustice in a way that was completely non-negotiable, not performative, not for show. She simply could not tolerate it, and she said so regardless of the context or the audience. And my father. James was the most fundamentally alive person I've ever met, Lupin said without hesitation. It wasn't cheerfulness, he had rotten days like everyone. It was that he was entirely present in whatever he was doing. He never half-attended anything. A pause. He would have been paying full attention to you right now, and he would have been unable to stop himself from trying to explain the Patronus to everyone who would listen. Harry smiled. He sounds exhausting. Completely, Lupin said warmly, and wonderful for it. They sat in the empty classroom for another 20 minutes, talking, and Harry asked questions he'd been carrying for 12 years, and Lupin answered them with the care of someone who understood that the answers mattered, and that incomplete truths were a specific category of harm. He wrote to Cross in late September, using the natal which had taken to arriving at Harry's window with the proprietary confidence of a regular correspondent. The crack, he wrote, how wide is it now? Cross's reply came the next evening, wider than August. The entity has been more active since September. I think it responds to the dimensional activity at your location. The mantle's use pulls at the boundaries locally, and the crack is close to you. Maybe 40 miles. Harry wrote, where exactly? The next letter had coordinates that meant nothing to a 12-year-old in Scotland, so Harry gave them to Hermione, who had geography alongside everything else, and she identified the location in 40 seconds, somewhere in the North Sea. There's nothing there, no land, no structure. Nothing the Muggle world can see, Harry wrote back to Cross. What does the crack look like from the dimensional side? Cross's reply was longer this time, like a wound in silk. The boundary between this dimension and the space between dimensions is usually consistent. Think of a wall. The crack runs about 30 feet, and it deepens and opens and closes with something's breathing. It's not a static flaw, it's a living thing using the crack as a mouth almost, pressing its face to a gap and widening it with each press. Harry sat with this for a while. The binding at full development could hold a dimensional boundary the way it held a door. He understood this theoretically. He'd been practicing binding for 10 months, and it had grown from books and doors to the full restraint of a 60-foot serpent and the dissolution of a soul anchor. The dimensional boundary was larger by orders of magnitude. He wasn't ready to attempt it yet, and he knew it, and the knowing sat in his chest alongside everything else he was carrying. He wrote back, "How long before it's wide enough to be a real problem?" Cross's reply, "Spring if the entity maintains its current rate, maybe sooner if it has access to additional force. There are things that can destabilize a dimensional boundary from this side, large releases of dark magic especially. If something happened near the crack's location," Harry wrote, "I'll be ready by spring." A pause. Then the knot towel came back with a single line, "I know, that's what worries me." Harry looked at the letter for a moment. Then he folded it, put it in the lockbox under his bed that he'd secured with the binding. No physical lock. Just the absolute assertion of closed in mine and not for anyone else's hands, and went to dinner. October deepened. Quidditch happened in the rain, with Dementors appearing at the edge of the pitch during the game against Hufflepuff in a way that was apparently not supposed to happen but did happen. And what happened to Harry when they appeared was that he fell off his broom from 40 feet in the air. He had approximately 2.5 seconds of freefall. The experience of those 2.5 seconds was not what anyone would have expected. He fell and the Dementor's influence hit him like a wave, cold, consuming, his mother's voice surfacing immediately, "Not Harry, please, not Harry," and the mantle, responding to the combined pressure of the void and the fall, did something Harry had been approaching for months without quite arriving at. The fixed point practice. The stillness. The full dimensionality of a moving location. He held the present moment, himself falling 40 feet at this exact position in space and time, and then he held it in all its dimensions simultaneously, past and present, and the moment opened like a door, and Harry stepped sideways out of linear time for exactly 17 seconds. 17 seconds of the fall that should have taken 2.5. He didn't go anywhere. He didn't move backward or forward. He stepped aside the way you step aside from a crowd, and he stood in the still space beside the moment and let his awareness catch up with his situation, and he felt the Dementor's influence as something happening in a place he was observing rather than a place he was in. He gathered himself. He cast the Patronus, not with his wand, which was in his hand but irrelevant in this space, but with the full depth of what he was, and it came out as it had come out in Lupin's classroom, fractal and burning and enormous, the silver stag that was more than a stag. It hit the Dementor across the pitch like a wave of light hitting a shadow. The Dementor retreated at speed. Harry stepped back into the moment. He was falling. He'd been falling for technically 17 seconds of perceived time and approximately 0 seconds of linear time, and was still at the same height he'd been when he stepped out. And now he reached sideways with his right hand and spoke in the true language, and something answered. Not a broom, the idea of stability, the assertion of position held, and the fall stopped. Not dramatically. Just stopped 3 feet above the pitch, Harry hanging in the air for a moment that surprised him before gravity resumed and deposited him on the wet grass. The stadium was entirely silent. Then Hermione's voice from the stands very clearly, "Harry." He stood up. He looked up at the stadium, at the Dementor retreating at the edge of the pitch, at the rain, at the crowd who were all entirely still in the way crowds go still when something has happened that they don't have a category for. He picked up his wand from the grass beside him. "I'm fine," he called up to Hermione. Her response to this was extensive, and he couldn't make out the specific words over the distance and the rain, but the tone was entirely clear. Dumbledore was at his side 30 seconds later, materializing with the specific speed of someone who could apparate within the school grounds when sufficiently motivated. He looked at Harry from standing height. They were almost eye level now. Harry was growing, with an expression that had entirely abandoned pretense. "Tell me," the headmaster said simply. "I stepped sideways," Harry said, "out of the moment just briefly." Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. The rain came down around them. "Transit," he said, and his voice was the voice of someone recognizing a word in a language they've been learning. "Yes," Harry said, "the second aspect." "Harry," Dumbledore looked at him with complete attention, no performance. "Are you all right?" It was the question that mattered, not what had happened, not the mechanics, not the strategic implications, just, "Are you all right?" Harry considered it honestly. "Yes," he said. It was the right moment for it. I didn't force it." Dumbledore looked at him for another moment. Then he put a hand briefly on Harry's shoulder, not paternal, not proprietorial, the gesture of one person acknowledging another, and removed it. "The broomstick is destroyed," he said. "I'll replace it." "You don't have to, Firebolt," Dumbledore said mildly. "I believe they've just come on the market." Harry blinked. Professor, that's extremely expensive." "It's also extremely appropriate," Dumbledore said. "You fell 40 feet managing a transit event while resisting a Dementor breach at a school sporting event. I think a broomstick is a reasonable institutional response. The warmth in his eyes was genuine and slightly conspiratorial. Also, I suspect Oliver Wood may have already submitted a formal request. Harry laughed. It came out more relieved than he intended. Sirius Black appeared in the Gryffindor dormitory on the last night of October. Harry woke to Ron's screaming, which was substantial, and Sirius Black standing at the foot of Ron's bed with a knife, and an expression that collapsed immediately into something frantic and wrong-footed when he realized he'd woken everyone. He fled through the portrait hole before anyone got a clear look, and the castle went into the specific kind of chaos that follows an event nobody has a category for. Harry sat on his bed in the aftermath and thought. He'd been thinking about Black for 2 months. He'd been thinking about the absence in the photograph, the wrongness in the official story, the specific quality of the events that didn't quite resolve into the shape that guilt usually had. Someone who had murdered 13 people and was coming specifically for Harry Potter did not flee when discovered in a dormitory. Someone who had a purpose would have acted when the opportunity was in front of them. Black had fled. From a dormitory full of sleeping children, one of whom was Harry Potter, supposedly his target. He'd fled. Harry got up at 5 in the morning when the castle had resettled and stood at the window and looked out at the grounds and let the sight extend as far as it could reach. Sirius Black was somewhere in the grounds. He could feel the absence moving through the landscape, that specific negative space, not a signature but the impression of one. It was moving fast away from the castle. Running, Harry thought, not hunting, running. He wrote to Cross the next morning, "Can you research the original evidence against Sirius Black? The actual primary sources, witness accounts, physical evidence, ministry records if you have access. Something is wrong with the official story." Cross's reply was quick, "Define wrong." Harry wrote, "The shape of it doesn't match guilt. I'll explain further when I know more." Cross wrote back, "I'll look. I know a solicitor who handles unusual cases." November became December. The firebolt arrived anonymously on Christmas morning, the finest broomstick Harry had ever seen, and Hermione immediately reported it to McGonagall as a potential dark object, which Harry bore with patience and genuine affection, and McGonagall kept it for 2 weeks while experts examined it, and returned it with an expression that suggested she found both the broom and its anonymous donor interesting. Harry thought about who sent anonymous presents. He thought about the cloak. He thought about an old man with half-moon spectacles who had been, Harry was fairly certain, making carefully calculated investments in Harry's capabilities for about 14 months. He said nothing about this to anyone. Some things you let the old man keep. The Patronus lessons with Lupin continued through the winter and became something more than Patronus lessons. They became the conversations Harry had been having in fragments with other people, assembled into something more complete. Lupin knew the wizarding world from a position of necessary outsidership, monthly, transformative outsidership, and he talked about it with the particular clarity of someone who had spent decades understanding a system that didn't fully accommodate him. He knew Sirius Black, had known him since they were 11, and the things he said about Black when Harry asked directly were inconsistent with what someone said about a person they believed guilty. "You know he's innocent," Harry said one Tuesday evening in the third-floor classroom between Dementor exercises. Lupin went very still. "You know," Harry said again, "or you strongly suspect. The things you don't say when I bring up his name take up more space than the things you do say." Lupin looked at him for a long moment. "I have no evidence," he said. "I haven't had evidence in 12 years. Tell me what you believe." Another pause. Then Lupin sat down in his chair and said, "I believe Peter Pettigrew is alive." He said it with the specific quality of someone releasing a weight they've been carrying alone for a very long time. "I believe the man who died in the street was not Peter. The finger, they only found a finger. Peter was the one with the expertise to fake his own death. He was an animagus like James and Sirius and I were, and his form was a rat." He stopped. "I have believed this for 12 years. I have never said it because believing something and being able to prove it are very different things." Harry looked at him. "Pettigrew was the secret keeper." "Yes, not Sirius." Lupin's voice was steady but barely. They switched at the last moment. Sirius's idea, he thought he was too obvious that Voldemort would go for him first. He closed his eyes briefly. "So we all knew Sirius was secret keeper and none of us knew Peter was, and when everything went wrong, everyone assumed the person they thought was secret keeper had betrayed them," Harry said. "Yes. And Pettigrew, if he's a rat, where would he be?" Lupin looked at him with the specific expression of someone who has just watched 2 pieces of a puzzle he'd been carrying separately find each other. "Somewhere he could stay a rat," Harry said. "Somewhere with a family, somewhere no one would think to look." He paused. "A pet." Lupin said nothing, but his hands on the arms of the chair went white at the knuckles. Harry picked up his wand. "Tuesday next," he said, "we continue." He walked out of the classroom and along the corridor and thought very quickly and very clearly about what came next. He found Pettigrew through a combination of the site and the Marauders map, which Fred and George had given him in October with the proud confidence of people bestowing something extraordinary, and which was extraordinary enough that Harry had spent 3 evenings simply reading it with the site, appreciating the magical engineering of it, the layers of tracking and intent. It showed every person in the castle by name. The small dot labeled Peter Pettigrew lived in the Gryffindor boys' dormitory, on the map, in Scabbers' vicinity. Harry had known for 2 days before the night he acted on it. He chose the night carefully, a Tuesday in March when the moon was waxing but not yet full, when Lupin was still steady and could be relied upon, when the castle's rhythms were such that the corridor outside Gryffindor Tower would be quiet. He told Ron and Hermione because that was the agreement and he meant it. Ron's face when Harry told him did several complicated things and resolved into something pale and steady. Scabbers had been his family's rat for 12 years. Percy had had him first, then Ron, worn and gray and always slightly sickly, and Ron had carried him and complained about him and cared for him in that specifically undemonstrative way Ron cared for things he was privately attached to. "You're sure?" Ron said. "Yes," Harry said. "I'm sorry." Ron looked at Scabbers in his cage on the desk. Scabbers looked back with the incurious mild expression of an animal that had lived for 12 years significantly beyond the natural lifespan of his kind. "Right," Ron said. "What do we do?" They did it efficiently. Harry reached into Scabbers' cage and held the rat with the binding, the same assertion he'd used on the basilisk. "The same quality of this is what this is and it cannot change," and said in the true language very quietly, "Show what you are." Pettigrew couldn't transform against the binding. But he couldn't maintain the form either, under the direct assertion of truth. The rat shuddered and stretched and made sounds that were wrong for a rat, and they all three looked away, because the transformation was deeply unpleasant to witness. And when they looked back, there was a small, pale, sweating man crouching in the cage, and making desperate scrabbling motions against the binding that held him. He looked exactly like his photograph from the file Cross's solicitor contact had obtained. Exactly, Ron's face was doing something Harry didn't want to look at too directly. "Pettigrew," Harry said. The man flinched. Please, I can explain. You were the secret keeper," Harry said. He was so powerful I couldn't. You watched Sirius Black go to Azkaban for what you did," Harry said. "Please, where is he now?" Harry asked. "Voldemort, where is he?" Pettigrew went very still at the name. He looked at Harry with the eyes of a man who had spent 13 years making very small, very immediate calculations about his own survival, and who was trying to make another one now. He's not powerful anymore, but he's alive," Harry said. "Where?" The calculation completed, Pettigrew's eyes shifted. "Albania," he said, "but he's coming back. He has plans. He has followers who—" "Enough," Harry said. He kept the binding on Pettigrew and walked him contained to Dumbledore's office, with Ron and Hermione on either side, and McGonagall appeared from a side corridor because McGonagall always appeared when something significant was happening in her castle, and by the time they reached the stone gargoyle there were 3 professors behind them. Dumbledore opened the office door before Harry knocked. He looked at Pettigrew in his binding. He looked at Harry. He said nothing for a moment that was very full. "Come in," he said quietly, "all of you." The aftermath was significant and moved quickly. Fudge arrived by morning. The ministry's interrogators arrived by afternoon. Pettigrew, held in a secure room under the binding, plus every conventional restraining charm the faculty could produce, confirmed enough under Veritaserum to open an inquiry. The inquiry would take time. The formal exoneration would take longer. That was the reality of institutions. They moved at institutional speed, which was the speed of many people's comfort levels averaging together into slowness. But the evidence was in ministry hands by Thursday, and on Friday morning Harry received a letter from Sirius Black, written in a hand that shook slightly but was unmistakably the hand of a free person, because prisoners didn't write like that, didn't have that expansive confidence even in their letters. "I don't know how to start this letter," it said. "I've started it 6 times. I've been told what you did, not all of it, I suspect, because I'm told what you did is difficult to explain in conventional terms, and I understand there's more to you than the papers have ever come close to suggesting. I was your father's best friend. I loved your mother like the sister I wish I'd had. And I should have been there for you for 12 years and I wasn't. I'd like to be now if you'll allow it. I won't pretend I can fix the time that was lost. But I'm told you're extraordinary and I'm told you're also 12 years old, and those 2 things should not require each other to be true. Write back if you want, don't if you need time. I have a great deal of time now and I intend to use it better than I have been." Sirius Harry put the letter down on his desk. He picked up his quill. He wrote, "I'll write back. Give me a day to think about what I want to say properly." He sent the letter with Hedwig, who took it with the regal confidence of an owl who understood her cargo mattered. Then he sat for a while in the warm late afternoon light of the dormitory, with the window open to the spring air and the grounds green and impossibly ordinary below, and felt the mantle pulse in its steady cold warmth, and thought about all the things that had been set right and all the things that hadn't been yet. Albania, Pettigrew had said, coming back, plans, followers. Harry pressed his palm to his chest. The mantle was patient. It had always been patient. It had been waiting in him since he was 15 months old, growing with him, learning what he was learning, becoming more itself as he became more himself. The dimensional crack in the North Sea was 30 feet wide and breathing. Voldemort was in Albania, formless but planning. The something in the space between dimensions pressed its face to the wound in the world and widened it slightly with every press. And Harry was 13, sitting in his dormitory on a spring afternoon, and his godfather had just written him a letter with shaking hands. And Ron was downstairs trying to explain what had been living in his pencil case for 3 years to Fred and George, who were apparently delighted by this in the particular way they were delighted by anything sufficiently chaotic. And Hermione was in the library because some things were constant, and Hermione in the library was one of them. Harry picked up his transfiguration homework. He had 12 inches to write on the theory of partial transformations. He picked up his quill and started writing, and outside the window the Scottish spring did what it always did, arrived late and committed all at once, the hills going green seemingly overnight, and the mantle rested warmly in his chest and kept its patience, because what was coming would come in its time and would find Harry Potter exactly where it found him, ready, clear-eyed, and not the least bit afraid. Chapter 6. The unraveling the fourth year began with fire. Not metaphorical fire, actual fire. The kind that lit up the Quidditch World Cup campsite in the small hours of the morning and moved through the tents like something that had been waiting for permission. Harry stood outside their tent with Ron and Hermione and watched the dark mark rise above the tree line, a skull green and enormous, a serpent through its mouth, and felt two things simultaneously and with equal clarity. The first was the mantle's response. A deep, attentive pulse, not alarmed but present, the way a sailor feels a change in the wind before the flags move. Whatever had cast the mark had done it with genuine dark power, not theater, and the power had a quality he recognized from Tom Riddle's diary and from Quirrell's underlayer, and from everything he'd been reading in the repository book Cross had given him about soul work and dark anchoring. The second was simpler and more immediate. Ginny Weasley was 3 tents away, and she'd been in the crowd, and he needed to account for everyone before he thought about anything else. He moved before he'd consciously decided to move, slipping through the chaos of running, panicking campers with the ease of someone who could feel exactly where the open spaces were, and where the people were and what the ground was doing. He found Ginny with Molly Weasley unhurt, Molly with both arms around her youngest and her expression doing everything it could do at once. He found Neville with his grandmother, shaken but fine. He found the Weasley twins back-to-back at the edge of the tree line, having apparently decided that this situation called for wand readiness and attitude. Everyone's accounted for, Harry said when he got back to Ron and Hermione. Ron was looking at the mark in the sky. Who cast it? Someone who wanted to be seen doing it, Harry said. It's a signal, not an attack. He watched the skull shimmer against the dark. It's a message to the people who recognize it, Voldemort's followers telling them he's coming back. The quiet that followed that statement had a specific texture. Albania, Hermione said softly, what Pettigrew had said. Albania, Harry confirmed. He stood in the field and watched the mark dissolve slowly in the high air, and thought about timing, about plans, about the shape of a return that required this much theatrical announcement, and what that told you about the person planning it. Voldemort needed followers who feared him more than they loved him. He needed spectacle. He needed the specific kind of power that came from making people feel small. This was both a genuine strength and a genuine limitation, and Harry filed it alongside everything else he'd been building for 3 years. Then he went back into the tent and made tea, because the night was cold and there was nothing useful to do about the dark mark at 2 in the morning, and Ron looked like he needed something warm in his hands. The Triwizard Tournament came to Hogwarts in September, announced by Dumbledore with the particular brand of warm ceremony that the headmaster used for things he was privately concerned about. The warmth slightly more deliberate than usual, the bright eyes slightly more watchful. Harry caught him looking once during the announcement and gave him the faintest nod that meant I know you're worried and I'm paying attention. Dumbledore turned it into a smile for the hall and continued talking about age restrictions and eternal glory, and Harry returned to his shepherd's pie. The Beauxbatons and Durmstrang delegations arrived in October. The Durmstrang students moved with the particular energy of people who had been trained toward something specific and were quietly proud of it. Their headmaster, Igor Karkaroff, had the magical signature of a man who had been afraid for a long time and had organized his entire personality around managing that fear. He looked at Harry the way several people had looked at Harry over the years, with the calculating assessment of someone trying to determine what an unusual thing was worth. Victor Crumb, who was 17 and already the best seeker in the world and seemed genuinely bewildered by the level of attention this attracted, had a signature that was direct and powerful, and Harry thought, largely uninterested in politics. He was interested in flying. He noticed Harry noticing him noticing Hermione in the library and gave Harry a long, assessing look. Harry gave him a straightforward look back that meant she makes her own decisions and I'm her friend, not her guardian, and I think you probably already know she's extraordinary. Crumb gave a small nod. They understood each other. Harry's name came out of the Goblet of Fire on a Thursday evening, and the silence in the Great Hall had the specific quality of sound removed all at once. He sat at the Gryffindor table and looked at Dumbledore reading his name from the slip of parchment, and felt the mantle pulse once, not in recognition of the tournament, but in recognition of what the tournament was being used for. Something about the mechanism. Something about the intent. He walked to the chamber behind the Great Hall where the other champions were waiting, and stood with Cedric Diggory and Fleur de Lacquer and Victor Crumb, and when the teachers arrived with their concern and their questions, Harry said, "I didn't enter. Someone entered my name who wanted me in the tournament. You should be thinking about why someone would want that." The room was very quiet. Dumbledore looked at him with those old, careful eyes. He knew. Harry could see it clearly. Dumbledore had already arrived at the same conclusion and was managing how much to say and in which order, and the expression he had was the expression he wore when the board was moving faster than he preferred. "The contract," Moody said, "new defense teacher. Eye spinning in its socket, magical signature of a man who had spent 40 years fighting dark wizards and had the psychological architecture of a castle that had been besieged so many times it had incorporated the damage into its structure. The goblet's contract is binding." "Then someone created a binding specifically to target me," Harry said. "Which means they have both the access to the goblet and the motivation to put me in the tournament. Those two things should narrow the field considerably." Moody looked at him with the magical eye, which tracked differently from the regular eye. Harry could feel it moving across him in a scan. Moody's expression, which was generally a weathered landscape of suspicion, shifted slightly. "You're not frightened," Moody said. "I'm thinking," Harry said. "Same thing for most people." "Not for me," Harry said. He told Ron and Hermione everything he'd worked out that night in the empty common room after everyone else had gone to bed, and Hermione wrote 4 pages and Ron sat with his arms on his knees and said, "So this is connected to Voldemort coming back?" "Yes," Harry said. "The tournament is a mechanism. Someone's using it to get me to a specific place at a specific time. I need to figure out what place and what time before I'm in it." "The tasks," Hermione said. "They're obstacles, they're not the point. The point is the end, whatever comes after the tournament." "The cup," Harry said. He'd been thinking about this since the chamber. "If the cup is a portkey, you'd be transported the moment you touched it," Hermione said, fast and certain, the way she got when the logic was clear. "To wherever they wanted you." "To a ritual," Harry said. The word sat in the common room. Ron looked at him steadily. "The resurrection ritual from Pettigrew's testimony." "Yes." Harry had read every accessible text on dark anchoring and soul work, and the specific methods by which a formless, fragmented magical entity could rebuild physical existence. Read the repository book. He'd corresponded with Cross about boundary theory and the specific type of power that resurrection rituals generated. Blood of the enemy forcibly taken, that's what the ritual requires. Hermione's pen had stopped moving. "My blood," Harry said, "to bring him back with the protection inside it, the protection my mother's death put in my blood. He wants to take it and make it his, negate the protection by incorporating it." "That's why it has to be you," Ron said. "That's why it has to be me," Harry agreed. They sat with this for a moment. "So," Ron said, "what do we do?" Harry looked at the fire. He'd been working through this for 3 weeks, since the goblet, building and testing and revising the way he approached any significant problem, observation, analysis, decision, execution. He had a shape now. Not a complete plan. Complete plans were for situations with more information, but a shape, a direction. "I let it happen," he said. "To a point, I go through the tasks, I touch the cup, and when I arrive at wherever the ritual is, I don't give them what they need." "You could refuse to touch the cup," Hermione said, "and whoever is running this tries something else, something I can't anticipate." Harry shook his head. "I know what they're planning this way. I go in with full information and I stop it at the source." "You're going to let yourself be portkeyed to a dark ritual," Ron said slowly. "Yes, on purpose." "Yes," Ron looked at the fire, then back at Harry. "All right," he said. "Ron," I said, "all right." His voice was level and absolutely final. "You've thought it through properly. You always do. I trust that." He looked at Hermione. "We can't go with him. The portkey won't take us." "No," Harry agreed. Hermione was writing again fast. Then we prepare everything we can from this side, research the ritual, identify the location if possible, have a countermeasure ready. She looked up. Cross. He can help with the boundary work if the ritual generates a significant dimensional release, which it will. The crack. I know, Harry said. I've already written to him. She nodded. She wrote. Ron put his hand briefly on Harry's arm, a quick, solid pressure, the gesture of someone who doesn't say the emotional thing out loud but means it with every part of themselves. Harry nodded. They worked until 3 in the morning. The first task was dragons. Harry knew this before the champions were officially informed, because Hagrid showed him the dragons, showed him in the specific Hagrid way that involved going to look at the dragons together in the middle of the night as if this were a perfectly reasonable recreational activity. And Harry stood at the edge of the paddock and looked at 4 massive chained creatures with genuine appreciation and thought about what the task actually required. Not defeating the dragon, not fighting it, retrieving the golden egg from its nest. He thought about the basilisk, he thought about held things. The Hungarian horntail that was assigned to him by lottery was enormous and spectacular and furious, and it breathed fire in long, controlled bursts that suggested it was smarter than it was usually given credit for. Harry stood in the arena and looked at it and felt no fear, genuinely none, which he had stopped being surprised by in himself, and then he held out his right hand and called his firebolt from the equipment tent. This was the expected move. He mounted the broom when it arrived and the crowd noise went up appropriately. He flew. He didn't fly dramatically, he flew efficiently, because the dragon was tethered and the egg was in the nest and the question was speed and precision. He used the sight to track the horntail's attention the way he tracked the basilisks in the chamber, feeling where its focus was, where the blind spots were, what it was going to do a fraction of a second before it did it. And he was at the nest and had the egg in his hand and was away before the horntail had completed its turn. 41 seconds. The crowd was doing the thing crowds did when they had witnessed something they couldn't quite process, a collective noise that was surprise and excitement and a note of something almost reverent. Harry landed and handed the egg to Bagman and walked off the field. Cedric caught up with him. How did you do that? He asked, in genuine rather than competitive curiosity. He was a decent person, Cedric Diggory. Harry had established this over weeks of observation, the way you establish things you want to be certain of. Forthright, well-liked without trying to be, genuinely kind in the specific way that wasn't performed. The dragon tells you what it's going to do, Harry said, if you're paying the right kind of attention. Cedric looked at him with an expression that was evaluating this seriously. What kind of attention? Come to dinner sometime, Harry said. I'll try to explain it. Cedric smiled and they walked back to the champion's tent together. Cross arrived in February. Not at the school, he appeared in Hogsmeade on a Hogsmeade weekend, in Obscura's books, which apparently had a satellite location in Scotland that Harry hadn't previously known about and Cross produced without comment. The shop was the same smell, same organizational philosophy, same sense of having been here before the town around it. Cross looked worse than he had in August. Not physically damaged, something more internal than that. He had the quality of someone who had not been sleeping well, and whose not sleeping well was connected to something he'd been watching that didn't allow for comfortable watching. The crack, Harry said, as they sat down. 38 feet, Cross said, and it's changed quality. 3 weeks ago it shifted from something pressing against the boundary to something threading through it, like a finger finding a weakness and pushing through rather than against. Harry was completely still. A finger, he said, metaphorically. The entity has found a way to extend a part of itself through the crack without fully emerging. Think of it as a probe, testing the environment, learning what's on this side. Has it? Harry chose the word carefully. Has it become aware of me specifically? Cross looked at him with those clear, alert eyes. Yes, he said, I believe it has. The probe orients toward your location when you're using the mantle significantly. The transit event in October, it responded to that. It's been oriented toward Scotland since then. Hermione, seated beside Harry with her notebook open, said, What does it want? The mantle, Cross said, or rather what the mantle represents. A practitioner of this level in this reality is the thing that maintains the boundary. If it can consume the boundary's maintainer, the boundary fails, Harry said. Yes. Harry thought about this calmly. So Voldemort's resurrection, the power release from the ritual if it happens near the crack, it might be enough to open it fully, Cross said. Clearly already run this calculation. The timing is not coincidental. I don't think whoever is running Voldemort's return knows about the crack specifically, but dark ritual work on that scale always interacts with dimensional boundaries, and whoever planned this is sophisticated enough to have chosen a location near a pre-existing weakness. The bookshop was very quiet. Where is the ritual planned? Harry asked. I've been tracking it for weeks, Cross said. A graveyard, Little Hangleton. He paused about 35 miles from the crack's location. Hermione's pen had stopped. Harry did the mathematics of 35 miles and a dimensional probe and the power release of a resurrection ritual and arrived at his answer with complete clarity. All right, he said, I need to do two things simultaneously, stop the ritual and close the crack. You can't do both from the graveyard, Cross said. I know, Harry looked at him. You're going to be at the crack's location. Cross was quiet for a moment. What you're asking me to do, I'm asking you to be at the boundary when the ritual starts. I'm asking you to hold it from your side with everything you have while I shut down the power source from the graveyard. He held Cross's gaze. You said you owed the tradition something. You said you wanted to finish what you started. Cross looked at him for a long moment with those 20 years of experience in his clear, tired eyes, and Harry looked back with the patience of someone who has made a decision and is waiting for the other person to catch up. Yes, Cross said, I'll be there. I need 2 more weeks, Harry said. The transit, I can step outside a moment now. I need to be able to step fully between 2 fixed points. Short distances to move myself and one other person. Cross went very still. Full transit, it's the third task, Harry said, the maze. Whoever designed the cup as a portkey is counting on me touching it, which means they've designed a portkey to take me somewhere I can't leave easily. I need to be able to leave regardless of the portkey's intent. Transit at that level requires, I know what it requires, Harry said. I've been practicing the stillness for 2 years. I can hold any fixed point in complete dimensionality. The moving point practice, I've extended it to hold 2 simultaneous fixed points. He paused. I haven't connected them yet, that's what the 2 weeks are for. Cross looked at him, he looked at the table. He looked back at Harry with an expression that was beyond assessment now, that had moved past what assessment could accommodate. Show me, he said. Harry stood up. He found his fixed point, the chair he'd just left, complete in all dimensions, past and present. He found a second fixed point, the door at the far end of the shop. He held both simultaneously, which was the thing he'd been building toward, the convergence of 2 complete awarenesses, and then he looked at the line between them, the path between 2 points that existed fully in dimensional awareness, and he stepped. He was at the door, not quickly, not with the visual blur of a short apparition. He was simply at the door with the chair behind him and the space between the 2 points resolved smoothly and completely, like a sentence that ends correctly. He turned around. Cross had not moved. His hands were flat on the table. His expression was the expression of a man looking at a thing he trained his entire adult life to do and seeing someone do it better at age 14 than he'd managed at 40. Right, Cross said very quietly. Harry walked back to the table and sat down. 2 weeks, he said. 2 weeks, Cross agreed. The night before the third task, Dumbledore asked Harry to his office. It was not an unusual meeting. They'd been meeting roughly monthly since Harry's first-year conversation, a practice that had grown into something neither of them had planned and both of them valued. The format had evolved. Harry brought what he'd found, Dumbledore brought what he'd found, they compared and calibrated. It was, Harry thought, the most honest conversation either of them had with anyone about the reality of what was happening. Tonight, Dumbledore was standing at his window again. The grounds were dark and the maze was lit at its edges by magical torches, and from above it probably looked like a challenge that had been constructed with care by people who wanted to test extraordinary young witches and wizards. From this angle, knowing what Harry knew, it looked like the penultimate stage of someone else's plan. Tomorrow, Dumbledore said without turning. Yes, Harry said. I've been trying to identify our man inside the school for 4 months, Dumbledore said. I believe it's Moody. Yes, Harry said, or someone wearing Moody. Dumbledore turned then. His expression had the quality of being genuinely impressed and genuinely unsettled by the same information simultaneously. Polyjuice, Harry said. The real Moody's magical eye tracks differently from Polyjuiced Moody. Real Moody's signature has 40 years of accumulated field experience. It has a specific texture. Our Moody is a copy. Good copy, but the eye moves in a way that suggests the person isn't fully accustomed to it. I've suspected since November, Dumbledore said. But you're further along. I know who it is, Harry said. Dumbledore looked at him. Bartemius Crouch Jr., Harry said, supposedly dead in Azkaban. His father is the one who's been behaving erratically all year, the man I've seen on the map moving around the school at odd hours. He's got his son chained somewhere and under control of some kind, and whatever control he has been fraying. Harry paused. I think he's being controlled himself, by Pettigrew probably, which means by Voldemort. The whole chain goes back to Albania. Dumbledore sat down slowly in his chair. He looked at Harry across the desk, with an expression that was finally, fully, without reservation, the expression of a man who understood that he was not the most formidable person in this conversation. What are you going to do? He said. And there it was, the real question, asked directly without the layer of strategy or management that the old man had spent 100 years layering over his directness. Just the question, from one player to another. I'm going to let them take me to the graveyard, Harry said, and I'm going to bring Cedric back. Dumbledore's face went very still. I'm not going to let anyone die if I can prevent it, Harry said, and I can prevent it. And then I'm going to stop the ritual and close the dimensional crack, and Voldemort is not going to come back tonight. He looked at Dumbledore steadily. What I need from you is to be ready to move when I come back. Crouch Jr. will need to be secured, and the real Moody will need to be found, and the school will need to know the truth before morning. Dumbledore looked at him for a long, full moment. Harry, he said, and his voice was very quiet. I have been the most powerful wizard in this country for 60 years, possibly on this planet for at least 40. I have carried that understanding as both a responsibility and, I confess, a comfort, the comfort of knowing that if something terrible came, I would be sufficient to meet it. He paused. I am telling you this because I want you to understand what it means when I say that I believe without reservation that you are sufficient to do what you're describing. Harry looked at him. I'm also telling you, Dumbledore continued, that I will be ready. Every member of the Order I can reach will be ready. Whatever you need when you return, it will be there. Thank you, Harry said. One more thing. Dumbledore reached into his desk drawer and placed something on the desk between them. A small mirror, unremarkable, the kind you might find in any dressing room. Two-way communication. I'll have the other. If you need me before you're ready to come back, if anything goes differently than expected. Harry picked up the mirror. He looked at his own reflection in it. It was your father's design, Dumbledore said. He made them with Sirius. I've had Siriuses in safekeeping since he stopped. Since everything. Harry closed his hand around the mirror. His father's design, his godfather's mirror. Thank you, he said again, differently this time. He left the office. He walked down the spiral staircase and along the corridor toward the tower. The castle was quiet around him, the specific late-evening quiet of a place settling into sleep, hundreds of people dreaming their ordinary dreams. He went to the dormitory. Ron was still awake, sitting on his bed reading a letter that Harry recognized as being from Sirius. The handwriting was distinctive. Hermione had left a note on his pillow that said, "Everything is prepared from our end. Cross sent confirmation an hour ago. Come back." The last two words were underlined twice. Harry put the note in his lockbox. He lay down. He practiced the stillness, not the full transit, just the holding. The dormitory, complete in all dimensions, past and present, 5 beds and 5 sleeping or nearly sleeping people, decades of boys in the same room stretching backward through the site, and himself in the center of it, perfectly placed, the mantle warm and patient and ready. He slept. The maze was extraordinary. Someone had built it with genuine imagination, the hedges 20 feet high, enchanted obstacles at intervals, the whole thing designed to disorient and pressure and test. Harry moved through it with the sight fully open, which in a maze was nearly unfair. He could feel the structure of it. The path through it, the other champions' positions, Cedric moving in the north quadrant, Fleur already out, Victor's signature was wrong, compressed in the way that suggested he was under the Imperius, which Harry verified and countered with a direct, sharp assertion of the binding that broke the curse's grip and left Crumb standing confused in a clearing near the south hedge. He found Cedric at the maze's center at the same time Harry arrived. The cup was between them. Gold and glowing and packed with portkey enchantment, Harry could feel the destination encoded in it, feel the specific intent of it, the place it wanted to take whoever touched it. He had made his decision. He was not changing it. Cedric, Harry said. Diggory looked at him across the cup. You're here. The cup is a portkey, Harry said. Someone built it to take the winner to a location where a dark ritual is planned. I'm going to touch it deliberately because I can handle what's on the other side and I need to be there. He held Cedric's gaze. I need you to touch it with me because the portkey was built for the tournament winner and I don't know if it'll take me alone. Cedric stared at him. I'm bringing you back, Harry said. I promise, but I need a few minutes on the other side to do what needs doing. You planned this, Cedric said slowly, for months. Cedric looked at the cup. He looked at Harry with the expression of a person making a fast, genuine assessment of how much they trust someone they've known for a year. All right, he said, what do I do? Stay close and don't touch anyone, Harry said, and trust me. They touched the cup. The graveyard arrived with the specific violence of a portkey, a jerk behind the navel, and then cold air and dark sky and the smell of old stone and turned earth. Harry landed on his feet. Cedric stumbled and Harry caught his arm. He extended the sight immediately, mapping the space. Old graveyard, small village, a hill above them with a dark house silhouetted against the sky. And there, 2 figures moving toward them fast, one small and carrying something, one moving with the specific intent of a person who had a task. Peter Pettigrew. And something in a bundle that radiated dark power in concentrated malevolent waves. A fragment, a remnant. A thing that had been sustaining itself on the life force of others for years. Housed in a body that was barely a body, that had none of the qualities of a living person except the insistence of a consciousness that refused dissolution. Voldemort, Harry felt him properly for the first time, not the cold underlayer in Quirrell's skin, not the residue in the diary, but the full presence, the original signature, stripped of nearly everything except the most fundamental quality of a soul that had divided itself so many times it was barely recognizable as human and yet still unmistakably itself. Brilliant, warped, absolutely determined. Kill the spare, the bundle said in a high, cold voice. Harry moved. Not quickly, instantly. He stepped between Pettigrew's raised wand and Cedric with the transit. Not a full transit, just the single step between 2 points that he could now perform without effort, and the killing curse hit the headstone behind him and left a green flashing crater in the stone. Pettigrew froze. The bundle froze. Cedric, several feet away, was completely unharmed. Harry stood in the graveyard and looked at Pettigrew and then at the bundle in his arms, and the bundle looked back at him with red eyes that were the most concentrated point of pure cold intelligence he'd ever encountered. And Harry understood immediately and with complete clarity that Voldemort had not known what Harry was until this moment, and that this moment was a significant recalibration. You blocked the curse, Voldemort said, not a question, not quite shock. The assessment of a chess player watching a piece move in a way that shouldn't be possible. Yes, Harry said, with transit. The high voice was very controlled. You've achieved full transit. Yes. You're 14 years old, Voldemort said, and there was something in the phrase that was not disbelief but was its close neighbor, the quality of a person whose framework is being actively revised. Yes, Harry agreed. The ritual requires your blood, Voldemort said. I will have it. The gap between your capability and Pettigrew's is relevant but not prohibitive. That's a reasonable assessment, Harry said, except for 2 things. He didn't wait for Voldemort to ask. He held up one finger. First, Cross is at the dimensional crack right now, holding the boundary. Whatever power release this ritual generates, it won't be enough to open the crack fully because he's working against it from the dimensional side, and he's been preparing for this specific event for 6 months. He held up a second finger. Second, I'm not going to let the ritual happen. Pettigrew moved. He was fast, faster than he looked, and he'd had practice at survival-level action. The killing curse came again from his wand, and Harry stepped sideways, the single-step transit, clean and instant, and was behind Pettigrew, and his hand closed on Pettigrew's wand wrist, and he applied the binding. Pettigrew's entire right arm locked. His hand opened. The wand dropped. Harry caught it. He turned back to Voldemort. The bundle was struggling, the rudimentary body convulsing with the effort of doing something without the ritual it needed. The red eyes were fixed on Harry with an intensity that was beyond anger, something colder and more considered. You're going to destroy me, Voldemort said. No, Harry said. It surprised both of them. Harry found the word in his mouth before he'd consciously decided on it, but it was correct. You're not a Horcrux. You're the main part, the largest piece of what's left. He looked at the bundle steadily. I'm going to put you back where you belong, which is, the high voice was very quiet. The place past dissolution, Harry said. The place you've been running from since you were 16. You split yourself so many times trying to avoid it that you've become, he searched for the right word, unfinished, a thing that can't rest and can't advance, stuck, he paused. It doesn't have to be violent, I'm not your enemy, you're your own enemy. The silence in the graveyard was very complete. Pretty words, Voldemort said, from a 14-year-old. You said yourself I've achieved full transit, Harry said. The binding held a basilisk. I dissolved the diary's anchor without destroying the book. He held the red gaze steadily. You can fight me, which will be painful and which you will lose, or you can let me finish what you interrupted when you walked into my parents' house. Which is what? Voldemort said. A life, Harry said. Yours, the full arc of it properly completed. He paused. Tom Riddle on the Hogwarts Express, you remember, there was a moment you told me that yourself. Something moved through the red-eyed face, something so fast and so deeply buried that Harry almost missed it. That wasn't me, Voldemort said. That was a fragment. All of you is fragments, Harry said quietly. That's the point. He raised his right hand. He reached into the mantle's deepest aspect, the binding at its most fundamental, which was not stay or hold but return, the assertion of what things essentially were, the reversal of the insult of splitting, and he opened it toward Voldemort fully. The mantle went out from him like light from an open door. Voldemort screamed. Not in pain, in the recognition of something being completed that had been interrupted. In the particular violence of a thing that has been running for 60 years being told that it can stop. The fragments that were scattered in the remaining Horcruxes in the dimensional traces of decades of dark work, pulled and shuddered in distant locations as the binding reached for what they essentially were and began not destroying but calling home. It was not gentle. Harry had not promised gentle. He had promised finished. The rudimentary body dissolved, the red eyes closed, and what remained briefly for a fraction of a second that Harry witnessed with the sight at full extension was not Voldemort. Was not the Dark Lord. Was something much older and quieter and more complete, The original soul, stripped of all the additions and divisions, moving through to wherever things moved through to. Harry stood in the graveyard and let the mantle settle back. His legs were not steady. He sat down on the grass without planning to, and the cold of the earth came through his robes, and the stars overhead were very bright. Cedric was beside him in seconds. "What just done?" Harry said. "He's done." Pettigrew, bound and wandless, made a small noise of absolute desolation. The graveyard was quiet. And then, 35 miles away in the North Sea, Harry felt it. The crack, the dimensional boundary. The probe that had been threading through it retracting, fast and violent, as if burned because the power release of Voldemort's completion had gone out in a wave, and Cross had been at the boundary and had shaped it, had given it direction, had used it to push back against the entity on the other side rather than letting it feed the crack wider. Harry felt Cross hold the boundary, felt him pour everything he had into the push. He felt the crack close, not dramatically, a wound in silk closing. The boundary smooth and continuous and whole. Harry exhaled. He sat in a graveyard in Little Hangleton with cold grass under him and Cedric Diggory crouching beside him with one hand on his shoulder and Peter Pettigrew bound 10 feet away, and felt the mantle settle into a new configuration, not different, not changed, but more fully itself, the way a bone heals stronger at the break. He held up the two-way mirror. His reflection looked back at him, tired, 14 grass stains on both knees, hair doing the thing it always did. He said to the mirror, "Ready." Dumbledore's face appeared in it immediately. He'd been waiting. Of course he'd been waiting. "Ready?" Dumbledore confirmed. "I need a portkey home," Harry said. "Graveyard, Little Hangleton." "Cedric's with me. Pettigrew needs securing." He paused. "Tell Sirius I'll be at the castle in 20 minutes. He should be there." A brief pause from Dumbledore's end. "Sirius," Dumbledore said, "is already in the entrance hall. He came the moment the third task began. I believe McGonagall let him in on the grounds that no one who had been through what Sirius Black had been through was going to be refused entry to Hogwarts on a night when Harry Potter was doing something dangerous." Harry smiled. "He couldn't help it. Tell him 20 minutes, Harry said. "Harry," Dumbledore's voice very quiet. "Is it finished?" Harry looked up at the graveyard sky. The stars, very bright, very old, entirely indifferent to what had happened below them and entirely present regardless. "Yes," he said, "it's finished." The school knew by morning. Not everything would take months to fully emerge through ministry inquiries and investigative journalism and the slow work of public truth-telling. But the essential shape of it was known by morning. Voldemort was gone, not fled or defeated but gone completely and finally, in a way that the people who understood such things described differently depending on their framework. Destroyed, said some, completed, said Cross in the letter Harry received 2 days later. Beyond the veil, said the Department of Mysteries in a communication that used considerably more formal language and conveyed considerably more institutional bewilderment. Bartemius Crouch Jr. was found in the defense office in Moody's form, secured, and the real Aleister Moody was found in his own magical trunk, very angry and very alive and immediately terrifying to everyone who tried to assist him. Pettigrew was in ministry custody by midnight. The Prophet ran 17 consecutive issues trying to explain the events of June 24th and achieved partial accuracy at best. Dumbledore called a meeting of the Order the full Order, not a subset, and for the first time in 3 years had news that was not a holding action or a contingency plan. He had an ending. Harry was not at the meeting. He was in the hospital wing for exactly 6 hours, until Madame Pomfrey was satisfied that the physical cost of full transit and extended binding and direct engagement with the essential soul of Tom Riddle had not done anything permanent, and the 6 hours was mostly spent sleeping and eating and talking to Ron and Hermione and Sirius. Sirius sat beside the bed with the specific quality of someone who has been afraid for 20 minutes and is processing it very slowly. He looked at Harry with the complicated, complete love of someone who has known a person since birth and only just met them and said nothing for a long time and then said, "Your father would have had 17 opinions about everything that happened tonight." "Good or bad opinions?" Harry asked. "All of them simultaneously," Sirius said. "At volume." Harry laughed. It echoed in the wing. "You were extraordinary," Sirius said more quietly. "I want to say that. I'm allowed to say that, I think." "You're my godfather. You're contractually obligated." "No, I mean," Sirius stopped. He looked at Harry with those gray eyes that had been a photograph with an absence in them and were now very present and quite wet at the corners. "I mean that James and Lily," he stopped again. "They would have been so." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Harry looked at the ceiling of the hospital wing. He pressed his hand to his chest where the mantle rested, warm, patient, a little deeper now than it had been yesterday. "Be worthy of it, be kind. These two things are not in conflict." "I know," Harry said softly. 3 days after the third task, Harry went to Dumbledore's office one last time before the end of term. The headmaster was standing at his window. Of course he was. You knew, Harry said without accusation. Before I told you anything, you've known for years that I was going to be something beyond what the prophecy described. I suspected, Dumbledore said. I hoped. You were managing me, Harry said. Not badly. The firebolt, the mirror, the stone's removal. You were supporting my capabilities while letting me develop without direct interference. Yes, Dumbledore said simply. Why? The old man was quiet for a moment. Then, because I have made a practice of directing people's power toward outcomes I had decided on in advance, he said. With the best intentions. Always with the best intentions. He turned from the window and his face had the quality of someone saying something they've been working toward for a long time. I have been wrong before about what people needed. I was wrong about Ariana. I was wrong about Grindelwald. I chose the game rather than the person on both occasions, and the cost was, he stopped. Irreversible. Harry looked at him. You were not a piece, Dumbledore said. I was determined about that. Whatever else I managed imperfectly, I was determined that you would not be managed. He paused. I think I managed that mostly correctly. Mostly, Harry agreed, and there was warmth in it. Something in Dumbledore's expression shifted, the warm composure relaxing into something more unguarded, more genuine, the expression of a very old man who has been the most powerful person in every room for a century and has just had the experience twice in 1 week of being genuinely grateful not to be. You surpassed me, he said. It was not a difficult admission. It was simply true, and Dumbledore was, when the situation had fully resolved itself, a man who could say true things without dressing them in dignity. In some ways, Harry said. In other ways, no, Dumbledore said gently. Not in other ways, completely. The depth of what you carry, the work you've done with it, what you achieved in that graveyard, he shook his head. I could not have done it. I would have faced Voldemort and fought him and won perhaps with great cost. You didn't fight him, you finished him. He looked at Harry steadily. That required something I don't have. What? The willingness to see what he was rather than what he had done, Dumbledore said. I have spent 60 years looking at Tom Riddle and seeing a threat to be contained. You looked at him and saw a person who got lost, Harry said. Yes, Dumbledore's voice was very quiet. That required more than power. That required a quality of mercy that I find I could not sustain under the weight of everything he'd taken from the world. He paused, including from you. Harry thought about the cold graveyard, about red eyes, about there was a moment said in the voice of a fragment that was still somewhere underneath everything, the boy who had walked onto a train at 11 years old. He was someone before he was Voldemort, Harry said. That mattered. Yes, Dumbledore said. I believe it did. They stood in the office, the circular room with its instruments and portraits and history, in the particular quiet that follows a conversation that has said what it needed to say. What now? Dumbledore asked. Not what are your plans, not what does the mantle require, just what now from one person to another in the aftermath of something enormous. Harry thought about Cross's letter, which had described the boundary as fully healed and the entity as retreated. Cross had described the act of closing the crack in the true language, words Harry recognized as the language of someone who had spent 20 years practicing something and had finally, once, done it at the level it was meant to be done. He'd sounded lighter in the letter. Like something had resolved in him alongside the crack. He thought about Sirius, somewhere in the castle below, staying for the end of term because Dumbledore had offered, and because neither of them was ready to say goodbye yet. He thought about Ron, who was currently teaching Neville to play chess with the patient, methodical generosity of someone who understood what it was to need someone to believe in your capability before you believed in it yourself. He thought about Hermione, who had a new stack of books and a new set of problems and an expression of bright, comprehensive purpose. He thought about the mantle in his chest, warm and patient and deeper now, fully itself, carrying its full weight without apology. Now, Harry said, I go back downstairs. He turned toward the door. Harry, Dumbledore's voice was warm and final and had in it the quality of everything the old man wasn't quite saying, all the things that didn't need to be said. It has been the great privilege of my long career to have known you. Harry stopped at the door. He looked back. Thank you, he said, for getting out of my way when it mattered. Dumbledore smiled, the real one, the unguarded one, the one that didn't manage anything. Harry smiled back. He walked out of the office and down the spiral staircase and along the corridor toward the sound of the school, the noise and warmth of it, the living weight of it. All of those people getting on with their ordinary, extraordinary lives inside the walls of this place that had made room for him. Peeves sailed past overhead, cackling, dropping ink from a stolen bottle in a long blue streak across the floor. A group of third years scattered and shrieked. Nearly headless Nick drifted through the wall looking philosophical. Harry stepped over the ink streak and kept walking. The great hall was at dinner. He could hear it from the corridor, the vast warm noise of several hundred people eating and talking and laughing, which was the best possible sound that any building had ever contained. He pushed open the doors and it hit him all at once. The smell of the food, the candles floating overhead, the enchanted ceiling showing a clear June evening, the 4 long tables with their specific populations and energies and ongoing dramas. Ron waved at him from halfway down the Gryffindor table with the enthusiastic confidence of someone who had been saving a seat, and is pleased the seat saving has paid off. Hermione looked up from her book with an expression that was relief and satisfaction simultaneously, which was her version of thank goodness. Neville had apparently won the chess game because he was wearing Ron's expression of someone who has discovered something new about what they're capable of. Sirius was at the staff table, sitting next to McGonagall, who had apparently made her peace with having a recently exonerated, technically still sorting out his legal status man at her table, and was talking to him with the animated energy she reserved for conversations she was genuinely enjoying. Harry sat down. He filled his plate. The candles floated. The ceiling showed the first stars coming out over Scotland, very bright, very patient, the same ones that had been there over the graveyard and were here over the Great Hall and were everywhere at once without contradiction. "How's Dumbledore?" Ron asked, mouthful. "Good," Harry said, thoughtful. "That's what he is when he's actually okay," Ron said knowledgeably. "I know," Harry said. "Are you all right?" Hermione asked. Not performance, the direct question in the direct way she had when the thing mattered. Harry pressed his palm flat to his chest for a moment, the private gesture so practiced now it was barely conscious. The mantle pulsed back, warm, patient, complete. "Yes," he said, and meant it with every part of himself. He ate his dinner and Ron talked about chess, and Hermione had 17 opinions about the Triwizard Tournament structural failures as an educational exercise. And Fred and George set off something small and sparkling at the far end of the table that made the first years shriek with delight. And Peeves came through the ceiling briefly to throw something at Percy. And the great warm noise of the hall went on, and Harry Potter, bearer of the mantle, Sorcerer Supreme. Boy who lived and chose to go on living fully, sat in the middle of it and felt with complete and unambiguous certainty that he was exactly where he was supposed to be. Not because destiny had placed him. Not because prophecy had pointed to this seat and this table and these people. Because he had chosen it, all of it. That was the difference. That had always been the difference.